American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 776-800. Sizzle. Your magnetic boots stomped heavily on the broken ground covered with gravel and debris. The vibranium wings behind your vibranium power armor instantly transformed into propulsion devices, continuously spewing out even more brilliant energy light from within. The next second, countless living metals, rapidly wriggling out from inside the gorget, enveloped the vibranium modules, completely covering your skull helmet over your head. Your massive body quickly ascended into the turbid, dim yellow sky. And as the altitude continuously increased, through the aid of your optical lenses, you immediately saw the continuous explosions and firelight on the ground dozens of kilometers away, as well as the dense swarm of dead helicopters in midair, or dilapidated landing pods carrying a large number of orcs. You unhesitatingly controlled the propulsion devices behind you. You streaked across the sky like a golden meteor, rapidly flying towards the more intense battlefield. Rumble. By the time you successfully arrived above the smoke-filled battlefield, you immediately used the indestructible properties of the vibranium power armor and the terrifying speed provided by the propulsion devices to forcefully penetrate one orc landing pod after another that had no time to evade. As large numbers of landing pods violently exploded on the spot, orcs, brandishing their claws and teeth, fell heavily onto the broken ground like dumplings. At the same time, hundreds of dead helicopters quickly discovered your presence, and a large number of orcs piloting them abruptly changed direction, launching a relentless, frantic attack on you. You maneuvered through the air with incredible agility. The furnace heart, held firmly in your palm, continuously unleashed dense barrages of azure plasma spheres, rapidly destroying one dead helicopter after another. At this moment, your sudden arrival undoubtedly greatly alleviated the combat pressure on the mortal defense force. You inadvertently noticed that many alert turrets, which were performing anti-aircraft duties, were adjusted from an aerial to a ground orientation, beginning to use terrifying firepower to slaughter an even more astonishing number of orcs. After some time, you almost single-handedly cleared out a large number of landing pods and dead helicopters from the sky. Even though you knew this was likely just a drop in the ocean of the regular orc invasion force. But before the next wave of greenskins began their landing operation, you bought more breathing room for the Empire. You did not choose to immediately begin the carnage and clearing of the countless greenskins on the surface. You immediately controlled the propulsion devices behind you to slightly adjust your flight direction. Your entire massive body heavily penetrated the surviving roof of a dilapidated forging factory, heavily landing inside a large position established by the mortal defense force. Boom! With a thunderous roar echoing all around. Your magnetic boots were deeply embedded in the hard ground. The immense roar also made many injured personnel, who were resting, and highly tense mortal warriors instinctively raise the lasgun in their palms. However, when their vision, through wisps of rapidly dissipating smoke, clearly saw your massive physique, far exceeding that of a normal Astartes, and the Starfire glory power armor shimmering with a faint golden luster. Your ears were immediately filled with the exclamations and shouts of countless mortal warriors. Ah, the Emperor has manifested. Brothers, another angel has come. We are truly saved. For the Emperor. The incredibly noisy sounds made you, wearing a skull helmet, unable to help but take a deep breath. The Mind Stone in the center of your forehead seemed to ripple with wisps of bright yellow, hazy light. Silence, everyone. Tell me, who is the local commander? Have them come see me immediately. You shouted in a low voice to the surrounding mortal warriors. As soon as the words fell, behind the large crowd, a female defense force member, who had been carefully observing you, immediately stepped forward and then knelt on one knee before you. Lieutenant Mira, the last battlefield commander of the Cadian Imperial Guard, 203rd Regiment, salutes the angel. May I ask, my Lord Angel, which Astartes battle group do you come from? Do you have orders from the War Council? This Cadian woman, with a pair of purple eyes, first reported her unit designation, name, and rank to you, and then she cautiously asked you. The 22 Legion, Lost Primarch. Before this, have any of you seen a large Astartes wearing purplish gold power armor, or an unfamiliar figure draped in a dark green cloak? You slightly lowered your head, looking down at the mortal commander before you through your optical lenses, and said in a deep voice. However, at this moment, your first half of the sentence caused Lieutenant Mira, who was kneeling on one knee, and the large number of surrounding mortal warriors to fall into a state of shock. Even though most mortal warriors couldn't even identify the specific origin of an Astartes, they knew what a Primarch represented. The next moment, even the seriously wounded, enduring their pain, struggled to their feet from the ground. All the mortal warriors present knelt on one knee towards you, lowering their heads. Primarch, we have never seen the Astartes or the unfamiliar figure you mentioned. But a short while ago, 3 angels from the Ultramarines chapter came to support us, and they have now gone to the Titan manufacturing factory near the planetary orbital tower, attempting to find and decapitate the culprit behind this orc invasion, the warboss, Blackskull. Lieutenant Mira, whose expression was even more nervous than before, quickly said to you. Ultramarines. And they haven't seen anyone else. You, muttering to yourself, gradually fell silent. You highly suspected that in this simulated training, neither Doom nor the uniquely identified Fulgrim had descended here with you. Instead, they had been sent by the Emperor to other times and locations. Otherwise, given the severe situation facing this Forge world, they should have appeared as well. You quickly snapped out of your thoughts. You ordered Lieutenant Mira and the surrounding mortal warriors to rise from the ground. You extracted a large number of heavy firepower weapons from your storage page and distributed them to everyone, and a bottle of panacea capsules was given to Lieutenant Mira to heal the wounded. The next moment, your palms gripped the blood scythe and the newly retrieved Dawnbreaker Warhammer. You fiercely propelled your vibranium power armor, charging out of the mortal warrior's position and into the ongoing fierce battle. You directly launched a carnage operation against a large number of orcs. With the assistance of more emboldened mortal warriors and numerous alert turrets, you quickly cleared out the orcs in a large area, helping the Empire regain control. Subsequently, you obtained the map information of the entire Forge world and the specific location of the Ultramarines squad from Lieutenant Mira. Your massive body, clad in vibranium power armor, swiftly ascended deep into the sky under the fervent gaze of countless mortal warriors, flying towards another location. You fly swiftly through the murky, yellow-tinged sky. Soon, you can gradually make out the massive orbital elevator tower, firmly erected upon the Earth, used to connect the ground with the near-Earth orbit defense platform. Rumble. However, at this moment, you suddenly see a brilliant beam of light, composed entirely of chaotic warp energy, erupting outwards from within a Titan manufactorum near the orbital elevator tower. In the next second, a large amount of highly concentrated chaotic warp energy rapidly bombards the central position of the entire orbital elevator tower. As a series of dazzling flashes of light erupt, the chaotic warp energy, spreading everywhere, uses the orbital elevator tower's own massive structure to forcibly tear open an incomparably huge warp rift in the murky, yellow sky above. What happened? How is there a chaos incursion? It seems this Forge world has more than just greenskin orcs as a threat. Things are really lively now. You abruptly control the propulsion device behind your power armor, forcibly halting your massive body in midair. You can't help but let out a low, cold laugh from inside your skull helmet. Your icy gaze, through the lenses, stares at the chaotic warp energy around the orbital elevator tower, like a multicolored energy cloud, quickly pondering solutions. At the same time, your sharp eyes, instinctively scanning back and forth, also see, far away at the entrance of the Titan manufactorum, 3 blue figures heavily surrounded by a large number of bloodletters and a small number of plague drones, desperately attempting to break out. That is the Astartes squad belonging to the Ultramarines that Lieutenant Mira mentioned. You need to figure out what exactly happened in order to truly destroy the warp rift. Without any hesitation, you remanipulate the propulsion device, initiating an even faster dive towards the location of the Ultramarines trio. In your palms, you re-grip the Blood Reaper and the Dawnbreaker Warhammer, which you had just summoned. Approximately tens of seconds later, you, wearing your massive adamantium power armor, once again crash down like a metallic meteor into the attack formation of a large number of chaos demons. Swish swish swish. You forcefully sweep out the green glowing Blood Reaper. Countless bloodletters, completely blown away by the landing shockwave, don't even have a chance to swing their hellblades before being completely cleaved into flying pieces of flesh and blood by the sharp blade. Your thunderous landing, and the bloodline connection between Primarch and progeny, causes the three Ultramarines fighting valiantly to momentarily pause. Even their movements of swinging melee weapons or pulling the trigger of their bolters slow down by a beat. How is this possible? Could it be that Lord Guilliman has awakened? At this moment, an Ultramarines veteran with a square face, an extremely solemn expression, and two golden service studs nailed into one corner of his forehead, can't help but mutter a sentence. And the other two Ultramarines standing in a triangular formation with him are clearly also filled with endless doubt and irrepressible excitement. Your keen senses capture their faint words from the roars of the bloodletters and even the buzzing sounds of the plague drone engines. But you don't have time to correct the slight errors in their expression at the moment. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Seeing more bloodletters constantly pouring out from the front, you abruptly drive the adamantium power armor forward, and the Dawnbreaker Warhammer in your other palm is swung up forcefully. The heavy hammerhead, wrapped in an extremely terrifying whistling sound, slams heavily onto the ruined ground in front of you. Rumble. In an instant, terrifying shockwaves, constantly shattering the surface of the ground, rapidly spread outwards to a distance of several hundred meters. A large number of bloodletters who can't dodge in time are completely knocked to the ground by the shockwaves, and then instantly have their lives reaped by the Blood Reaper in your other palm. Buzz buzz buzz. One by one, metallic 10 rings emitting buzzing sounds also rapidly unleash a continuous bombardment on those plague drones being constantly shot by bolters, constantly reducing their numbers and threat. Ultramarines battle brothers, follow my advancing footsteps, don't get bogged down in combat, break out directly first. You roar to the Ultramarines trio who are currently engaged in melee combat with the bloodletters without turning your head. Having almost cut through the Chaos Demons, you stare at another wave of bloodletters pouring out from the corners of various buildings, and have no choice but to choose to change your combat strategy and thinking. If you don't close the warp rift, or kill the real culprit, then the Chaos Demons will probably only increase in number. You drive the adamantium power armor, stained with chaos flesh and blood, and choose a suitable direction, beginning to swing the two melee weapons in your palms in a rotating fashion. As a large number of Chaos Demons are sent flying and shattered, the three Ultramarines, reacting quickly, also swiftly follow your heavy footsteps, and all of you charge forward together. Before long, after some persistent Chaos Demons completely give up pursuing you for a long time, temporarily stopping inside a damaged building, you finally have a brief moment for communication. However, before you, who are slowly removing your skull helmet, can speak. The Ultramarines veteran who is clearly the squad commander immediately leads the two Astartes beside him to kneel on one knee in your direction. Captain Titus of the 2nd Company of the Ultramarines chapter, leading two battle brothers, pays respects to the Primarch. The Ultramarines veteran named Titus says to you in a sonorous and powerful voice, "Rise, Captain Titus. Your Gene Father Guilliman and I are brothers as Primarchs. It is fate that I can meet you in this Forge world. But can you temporarily explain to me why a chaos incursion suddenly occurred? What exactly happened before?" With a calm expression, you slowly lower the melee weapons in your two adamantium hands. You look down at the Ultramarines trio in front of you and ask, "Primarch, we mistakenly believed Inquisitor Drogon's weapon plan called Psychic Scourge, but he, having long been possessed by Chaos traitors, used our help to finally successfully open this warp rift." Titus says with a solemn expression. You gradually learned part of the truth from Captain Titus's simple description. This was nothing more than another huge disaster caused by an Inquisitor of the Inquisition. Perhaps the other party's in-depth research into the Warp Calamity plan attracted Chaos traitors, or they were gradually lured to the point of corruption and degradation by Chaos traitors. In short, after Inquisitor Drogon's conspiracy succeeded, Nemeroth, a Chaos Astartes eager to be promoted to Demon Prince, had led his Chaos Demon forces to invade the Forge World Gallia. Primarch, fortunately, we detected some problems at the last moment and made preparations in advance. Look, this is the energy source that the Chaos Traders want to seize from us. Just then, at Captain Titus's signal, another grizzled Ultramarines veteran immediately took out a special the warp device from his power armor's waist. It was the size of a thermo-melt bomb and was constantly emitting colorful energy light. You subconsciously widened your eyes. You keenly perceived a seemingly endless pure the warp fluctuation emanating from within this energy source. Without any hesitation, you extended your vibranium hand forward and took the energy source from his palm. It's better to keep this thing with me for now. It's too dangerous for you Astartes, Captain Titus. I plan to destroy that warp rift as soon as possible. Do you have any plans or suggestions for the upcoming battle? You casually placed the energy source in the storage space behind your vibranium power armor. Another Astartes new recruit, who looked younger, seemed to move his lips but said nothing to you. Then, you slightly lowered your head, gazing at Captain Titus, who was getting up from the ground, and asked. Primarch, I share your thoughts. We must stop the expansion of that warp rift as soon as possible, otherwise, as time goes on, the number of chaos demons will increase, until even more dangerous things descend from it. But there's another thing to note. The Greenskins war boss, Blackskull, must also be immediately decapitated, because Gallia's ground defenses are already struggling to resist more Greenskins invasions. Captain Titus, with an extremely solemn expression, told you his battle plan without any hesitation. You slightly nodded your chin, expressing agreement. You immediately ordered the Ultramarines trio in front of you to decapitate Warboss, Blackskull, while you personally went to deal with the more dangerous warp rift. If Captain Titus and his battle brothers successfully resolved the Greenskins' problem, they could come to support you. Oh, and one more thing, Captain Titus. At this moment, you slowly recovered your entire head with the writhing skull helmet, and your gradually deepening voice echoed continuously in the surrounding air. Although I don't really understand the fighting style of you Ultramarines, I still recommend that you wear your helmets during battle if you're not wearing an iron halo. Don't follow the example of my Primarch brothers, Guilliman, understand. As soon as you finished speaking, your vision through the eyepiece saw some muscles twitching on Captain Titus's solemn, square face. Ah, we will obey your orders, Primarch, he said to you with a stiff expression. Then I'll see you later, battle brothers. You nodded your skull helmet towards the Ultramarines trio. Your entire massive body, propelled by the continuous thrust of the propulsion system, rapidly ascended into the gradually darkening sky, achieving extreme speed. You directly controlled the propulsion system, flying towards the orbital elevator tower that was emitting a large amount of chaos psychic power. Tens of seconds later, your massive body, clad in vibranium power armor, heavily landed on the rooftop of a forging factory. Buzz buzz buzz. As one of your vibranium hands lifted upwards, a heavy vehicle chassis equipped with a bellicose pattern volcano cannon, along with a dozen Hellfire missiles, were all extracted to your side. Without any hesitation, you continuously initiated the launch procedures for a dozen Hellfire missiles, and quickly pressed the firing button for the volcano cannon. Boom boom boom. In an instant, Hellfire missiles, suddenly ascending into the sky, swiftly cut through the murky, polluted air, plummeting directly towards the base of the orbital elevator tower. The next second, a scorching beam as thick as a bucket burst forth, rapidly striking the large amount of swirling chaos psychic power. However, at this moment, your vision through the eyepiece showed that whether it was the Hellfire missiles causing terrifying explosions or the volcano cannon laser that even a demon prince couldn't resist for long, their destructive power was continuously weakened by layers of chaos psychic power. In fact, after causing only a small amount of damage and collapse to the entire orbital elevator tower, all the explosive fire completely vanished. Primarch, we also saw the destructive action you just launched. The effect wasn't that obvious. I believe that chaos psychic power of the same nature is needed to cause greater damage to the warp rift. In the Titan forging factory not far from you, there is a Warlord-class Titan already equipped with a Titan captain and auxiliary personnel, but they have been unable to start due to energy problems. You might need their help. Captain Titus's words echoed in your ears through the communication channel. Wearing your skull helmet, you took a deep breath, subconsciously tightening your grip on the blood scythe and dawnbreaker in your palms. You quickly activated the propulsion system behind your vibranium power armor to ascend into the air, then your entire body heavily landed on the ruined street, which was already filled with Chaos Demon bloodletters. You vigorously wielded the two melee weapons in your hands, crashing into the center of the large formation of Chaos Demons like a roaring steel train. You relentlessly slaughtered the Chaos Demons surging towards you, and rapidly charged towards the Titan forging factory. About 10 minutes later, you successfully arrived inside the Titan forging factory and saw the massive god machines standing on the ground. You immediately established necessary contact with the captain inside the Warlord-class Titan through the communication channel. Under his guidance, you used the energy source that continuously emitted the warp fluctuations to activate the firing function of a large volcano cannon. Sizzle sizzle sizzle. As a colossal, colorful the warp beam was fired with a roar. The accurately hit orbital elevator tower immediately suffered more severe damage and collapse, and the huge warp rift that was continuously expanding in the dim sky rapidly shrank. Rumble. The incredibly massive orbital elevator tower is being forcibly destroyed by the increasingly chaotic warp energy, but some of its structure has been levitated into the air by the warp energy. You immediately maneuver the propulsion device to ascend into the dim sky above, adjust your direction slightly, and then quickly begin flying towards the orbital elevator tower. Currently, the most dangerous warp rift is gradually shrinking and closing. However, the Chaos Astartes Nemeroth, who triggered all of this, and his demon forces are also trapped on Gallia and need to be eliminated by you as soon as possible. Primarch. The war boss, Black Skull, has been successfully beheaded by me. According to Lieutenant Myra's report, a large number of unlanded greenskin orcs have completely fallen into chaotic infighting. The orc problem has been resolved, and the three of us are heading towards the orbital elevator tower. Just then, Captain Titus's deep voice once again echoed in your ears. You slightly raised your eyebrows, hidden inside the skull helmet. You clearly have a new level of respect for Captain Titus's combat abilities. You even had the thought of recruiting him into the Legion. After all, in a large-scale war, if there is a Space Marine commander with such strong combat power, it will often greatly reduce the losses of the combat troops. Gilliman, oh Gilliman, although Captain Titus is your excellent son, he will soon be my son, you thought silently as you flew at top speed. Rumble. Your massive body, clad in vibranium power armor, landed heavily at the entrance below the orbital elevator tower. Countless metal wreckage and the tattered corpses of chaos demons were scattered across the surrounding ground. Thump, thump, thump. Just then, with a series of heavy footsteps echoing all around. Through your visor, you saw Chaos Astartes whose tall bodies had undergone flesh and blood mutations, quickly revealing their terrifying figures and charging towards you. A bunch of overestimating traitors. You gripped the blood scythe and Dawnbreaker Warhammer in your hands, and suddenly activated your vibranium power armor, launching an even more astonishing counter-charge against the considerable number of Chaos Astartes. Bang! Several Chaos Astartes who didn't have time to raise their demon weapons were sent flying by your brute force, and the suddenly swung blood scythe also violently cleaved the rushing Chaos Astartes in half. Boom! The Dawnbreaker Warhammer, accompanied by a terrifying whistling sound, slammed heavily onto the ground. More than a dozen Chaos Astartes who had just approached you were instantly overturned by visible shockwaves, and then you, immediately using Shadow Step to flash and jump back and forth, hammered their entire heads into explosions one after another. Once you could no longer see any living Chaos Astartes within your field of vision. Your massive body quickly activated the vibranium power armor and charged into the increasingly dilapidated building of the orbital elevator tower. You began to encounter heavy ambushes from a large number of Chaos Demon bloodletters and plague drones. Individual, Elusive Chaos Astartes also occasionally gathered together, causing some trouble for you as you climbed the orbital elevator tower. About 20 minutes later, after completely fighting your way through the entire orbital elevator tower, you successfully reached the huge platform at the very top of the tower. You, driving the vibranium power armor, slowly passed through the warp energy that still existed in the turbid air. Clap, clap, clap. Just then, a dull sound of ceramic steel palms colliding with each other suddenly rang in your ears. You saw at a glance, hundreds of meters away, a tall figure clad in Chaos Terminator armor, with a head exposed and severely mutated with flesh and blood, staring at you with an interested look and smiling. Quote, you did not speak to the other party. You simply slowly rested the heavier Dawnbreaker Warhammer on top of your vibranium shoulder armor, adopting a more suitable offensive stance. The blood scythe in your other palm was also subconsciously gripped tightly, ready to strike at the other party at any time. You vaguely sensed something was amiss. That was that this Chaos Lord named Nemeroth was behaving too calmly. Right now, the warp rift had been completely closed, and the Chaos Astartes and Chaos Demons that he relied on had also been basically cleared away by you. Even if he might think that his combat abilities were indeed outstanding, facing an even more terrifying Primarch, even a Chaos Greater Demon or a chosen champion wouldn't dare to be so presumptuous, right? Tisk, 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 worthy of being the Primarch whose name is renowned in the warp. As expected, a demon force brought by a mere Chaos Lord doesn't have much effect. Just then, Nemeroth, whose expression was stiff, suddenly spoke to you in a low and hoarse voice. You know who I am. No, it should be said that you already knew who I was. You are definitely not the so-called Chaos Lord Nemeroth, right? I don't think a Chaos Astartes would have the guts to face me. You, wearing the skull helmet, took a deep breath and said coldly to the other party. Heh, as expected, nothing can be hidden from the Primarch. At this moment, the Chaos Lord, whose stiff expression became even more sinister, suddenly let out a familiar, treacherous laugh. And his entire tall body also rapidly underwent an even more astonishing change. A pair of incomparably large blue-black wings instantly extended outwards from the back of his broad spine, which was constantly tearing apart. Subsequently, two blue-purple bird heads with long, narrow beaks gradually emerged above that rapidly shriveling, tattered corpse. Immediately afterwards, with a series of terrifying warp energy fluctuations rippling in the surrounding air, a huge, winged figure clad in golden armor and white robes, holding a gorgeous scepter, was clearly presented within your field of vision. Long time no see, Primarch. You didn't expect it to be me, did you? One of the huge, swaying bird heads said to you with a sneer. We are here on the orders of the Most Holy Tzeentch to ask you for something. As long as you are willing to hand it over obediently, we will retreat immediately, and even the seat of Chief Tzeentch Prince will be reserved for you at any time. The other huge bird head, which did not move, said to you in a deep voice. The changer of ways. At this moment, you, wearing the skull helmet, seemed to take a deep breath, and a low, gnashing voice slowly echoed in the sky above the entire orbital platform. Kairos Fatewever, tell me, how do you want to die now? Heh, dear Primarch, who lives and who dies remains to be seen. Since we are the seers of the Most Holy Tzeentch, how could we not know of your troublesome nature? A blue-purple bird head, slightly raised, said with a sneer. Show yourselves, my great demons of Tzeentch. Another blue-purple bird head, swaying back and forth, cackled and roared. Boom boom boom. In an instant, wave after wave of terrifying psychic energy fluctuations suddenly bloomed within your field of vision. Besides the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, standing on the orbital platform, 8 more great demons of Tzeentch with wings on their backs instantly appeared in the surrounding midair. At this moment, the contempt and mockery from a total of 18 bird heads converged on your massive body. You quickly sensed the endless malice and layers upon layers of chaotic psychic energy enveloping your entire being. Your bronze face, hidden inside the skull helmet, gradually tightened. However, the rhythm of your breathing and the beating of your 2 hearts became more and more relaxed and calm. From the moment the 9 great demons of Tzeentch appeared before you, you knew you were dead. Even if it were Sanguinius, the angel, the acknowledged ceiling of combat power among all the Primarchs, he might not be able to slay 9 great demons in a row. But you also understood that you actually had no way out, only to fight to the death. Primarch, admit defeat. We have said that as long as you are willing to hand over one thing, all the great demons of Tzeentch will immediately retreat into the depths of the warp. The Weaver of Fates, Kairos, gently shook the ornate staff in its palm, and streams of terrifying chaotic psychic energy gradually accumulated above its 2 bird heads. What in the world does that damned Tzeentch want to get from me? You took a deep breath and casually asked the Weaver of Fates, Kairos. You subconsciously tightened your grip on the 2 melee weapons in your palms, but the low hum emanating from inside the adamantium power armor showed that you were not relaxing at all. Haha, that thing is far away, yet close at hand. It can neither be eaten nor drunk. It is extremely important to the Primarch, yet it is overlooked by the Primarch. The Weaver of Fates, Kairos, seemed to think that victory was in its grasp, and one of its huge bird heads, swaying back and forth, even began to tell you a thought-provoking riddle. Close at hand, yet overlooked. As soon as the other party finished speaking, the brow hidden inside your skull helmet furrowed slightly, and the accelerated thinking also allowed you to quickly capture more important word hints. Just at this moment, having vaguely guessed something, you suddenly gently touched the center of your forehead with the back of an adamantium gauntlet. The sound of the Mind Stone colliding made you couldn't help but exhale. The Mind Stone. You are actually here for the Mind Stone. You roared in an extremely heavy tone towards the Weaver of Fates, Kairos. Tisk Tisk, a powerful artifact containing a large number of basic rules of an unknown universe, is actually inlaid on the helmet by the ignorant Primarch as a gadget for launching energy. Even the great and holy Tzeentch cannot tolerate such a waste of resources. The 2 huge bird heads of the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, said in relay, one sentence after another. Therefore, as long as the Primarch is willing to offer that Mind Stone, whether it is this galaxy or other universes, the supreme seat of the eternal Chief Tzeentch Prince will be permanently reserved for you. Imagine, with only our Lord above, countless great demons of Tzeentch submit at your feet, and even I must bow down to you. What an honor that would be. Thump. However, at this moment, the Dawnbreaker Warhammer, which you had been carrying on your adamantium shoulder armor, was heavily placed on the platform floor by one hand, and the loud noise completely interrupted the Weaver of Fates, Kairos's chant-like seductive words. Ha ha, you suddenly let out a low chuckle from under your skull helmet. To be honest, I really don't know where you great demons of Tzeentch get the confidence that I, a dignified human Primarch, an unofficial son of the Emperor, and the Lord of the 22nd Legion, would offer everything in order to become a lackey under Tzeentch. Even if I am willing to degenerate, then why not go and sell my life to Khorne, who offers better treatment, or enjoy the excitement of Slaanesh, or the harmonious Nurgle? You slowly placed an adamantium gauntlet on the sharp blade of the Blood Reaper. As the adamantium shell made a slight cracking sound, a large amount of pale golden Emperor's blood was forcibly smeared on the entire sharp blade. In the next second, perhaps the concentration of chaotic psychic energy in the surrounding air was too strong. Strands of golden psychic flames also suddenly burst out from the Emperor's blood, and the intensely burning fire even directly dispelled all chaotic psychic energy within 100 meters. Ah, you are indeed a stubborn corpse Emperor lackey. Do you think the other gods will easily pay attention to you? In that case, it is simply a waste of our words and good intentions. Do you think you can die in battle and be done with it? I can tell you now that as long as your current body is destroyed by us, your soul and consciousness, even if they are sheltered by the corpse Emperor, will completely fall into our seal. At that time, not to mention a mere Mind Stone, even your old home will become a plaything in our Lord's hands. At this moment, perhaps it was the shame of the lie being exposed, or the suppression and stimulation from the psychic flames. The Weaver of Fates, Kairos, standing not far away, couldn't help but roar. And as its 2 bird heads swayed back and forth, a large amount of extremely terrifying psychic sorcery also instantly burst out from the ornate staff. Almost at the same time, the 8 great demons of Tzeentch in midair also immediately shook the huge wings behind their spines. As they waved the scepters in their palms, a huge chaotic seal completely composed of chaotic psychic energy was also firmly buckled over the entire orbital platform. This seemed to be a special seal specifically designed to prevent you, who possessed the ability to fly, from easily escaping this place. Chi. As the thrusters behind the adamantium power armor suddenly erupted with brilliant light. When the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, roared out the platitudes to you, your entire massive body had already leapt into midair. You held a blood reaper with a burning psychic flame on its sharp blade in both hands, like a golden cannonball fired out, and charged heavily towards the Weaver of Fates, Kairos. In an instant, countless chaotic sorceries summoned by the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, at will repeatedly bombarded your massive body. But the outside of your adamantium power armor seemed to be surrounded by layers of invisible defensive barriers. Any chaotic sorcery that was enough to kill an Astartes had no effect on you. At this moment, besides the whistling from the violent wind and the burning sound of psychic flames in your ears, 3 low murmurs, each with a different timbre, yet incomparably clear, also echoed repeatedly. Chop. Kill. Ha ha. Hum. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Boom. You gripped the burning scythe in your hands and heavily slashed at the warp shield that Weaver of Fates, Kairos, quickly erected. Terrifying chaos psychic power and golden psionic flames continuously collided and annihilated each other, erupting outwards in waves of visible the warp fluctuations. Swoosh. The next second, the ornate scepter, wielded by Weaver of Fates, Kairos, with a fierce whistling sound, heavily struck one of your thick shoulder plates. Even Tzeentch Greater Demon's physical strength, which was weaker compared to Khorne Greater Demon, had been continuously amplified and stacked by numerous chaos sorceries. The overly powerful blunt force successfully penetrated the vibranium power armor's defensive limit, causing continuous shock damage to your massive body. Boom. You had just plunged your magnetic boots into the ground and hadn't even sprayed out pale golden blood from your mouth and nose. A life force, from an unknown source, instantly returned your entire body to full health, and even the considerable energy lost in previous battles was completely restored to its peak. Buzz. Immediately after, you clearly felt that the reaction speed and flexibility of your massive body had also greatly increased. Your shifting gaze could even clearly capture the complex trajectories of chaos sorceries slicing through the air. Sizzle. At the same time, the burning psionic flames on the blood scythe seemed to surge severalfold out of thin air. This undoubtedly caused the warp shield surrounding Weaver of Fates, Kairos's huge body to be instantly embedded, and then the sharp blade heavily slashed at one of its huge bird heads. Ah, my eye. Why do you always cut this head first? The huge bird head, which was forcibly split open by the blood scythe, shrieked in immense pain. Large amounts of fiercely burning psionic flames continuously purified the chaos flesh and blue bones on its head. The next second, your magnetic boots moved back and forth, and a speed far exceeding that of a normal Primarch quickly manifested on your massive body. You even dodged with extreme agility, narrowly avoiding the sudden peck of another huge bird head's beak, and the relentless chaos sorcery from its palm. Sizzle. You once again wielded the blood scythe in your palm, its psionic flames burning fiercely. You moved like a golden shadow, slashing back and forth around Weaver of Fates, Kairos, whose movements became increasingly clumsy. At this moment, the pain and wailing from Weaver of Fates, Kairos, seemed to make the 8 Tzeentch Greater Demons in midair vaguely sense something was amiss. Besides flapping their massive wings and attacking you, they also continuously waved their scepters, summoning numerous hopping pink horrors onto the orbital platform. Buzz. You casually released humming metal 10 rings into the air, creating a seemingly never-ending metallic spiral storm around you and Weaver of Fates, Kairos. What was even more bizarre was that beyond the purple, swirling energy ripples of the metal 10 rings, a green mist, symbolizing decay and destruction, slowly adhered to them. The next second, a faster flying Tzeentch greater demon unfortunately touched these rapidly spreading green mists. Its 2 huge bird heads didn't even have time to let out a few wails before its entire massive body instantly transformed into completely dissipated chaos. The warp and even more pink horrors were completely swallowed by the continuously spreading green mist, no longer making any sound. Boom, boom, boom. Perhaps it had sensed the sudden massive change. Weaver of Fates, Kairos, who was being continuously slashed by you on its massive body, suddenly flapped its massive wings behind it, wanting to temporarily ascend and escape your attack range. However, at this moment, with your pure physical strength rising out of thin air, you fiercely propelled your vibranium power armor, and your incredibly agile and swift steps allowed you to leap behind Weaver of Fates, Kairos's broad back. Thud! The blood scythe, gripped tightly in your palm, deeply embedded itself into the depths of its chaos flesh, and the terrifying burning of the psionic flames made Weaver of Fates, Kairos's 2 huge bird heads wail to the sky. You slightly lowered your body, narrowly dodging the terrifying sweep of the ornate scepter. You forcefully extended a vibranium hand, and your rapidly closing 5 fingers brutally inserted themselves into the base of one of Weaver of Fates, Kairos's massive wings. Your bronze face, hidden within the skull helmet, grew more ferocious, and a guttural roar erupted from deep within your throat. Ah! In an instant, an incredibly complete massive wing was actually torn alive from Weaver of Fates, Kairos's broad back by you. The extreme, bone-deep pain and the complete failure of its flight posture caused Weaver of Fates, Kairos, with its 2 huge bird heads flailing, to crash heavily downwards. Boom! With a deafening roar, you and Weaver of Fates, Kairos, landed together on the incredibly hard orbital platform. You violently sprayed a large gush of pale golden blood from your mouth and nose, hidden within the skull helmet, and even the blood scythe, gripped in your palm, couldn't help but loosen its 5 fingers. However, your entire combat consciousness seemed to have entered an extremely special berserk state. You gritted your teeth and, before Weaver of Fates, Kairos, could get up, you drove your vibranium power armor to pounce heavily onto its chest. You fiercely swung a vibranium fist, which had inadvertently been stained with psionic flames, and punched Weaver of Fates, Kairos's 2 huge bird heads again and again. Kairos! You continuously roared Weaver of Fates, Kairos's name, and your vibranium fist, burning with golden fire, had completely shattered its more severely wounded huge bird head. I want you to remember for all eternity, it wasn't me, the Primarch, who was forced to be sealed with you demon princes, but you demon princes who were forced to be sealed with me, the Primarch. Before the words fell, your 2 vibranium fists quickly extended downwards, and your huge hands had forcefully grabbed Weaver of Fates, Kairos's only remaining, shattered bird head. The next moment, from deep within the Mind Stone in the center of your forehead, a terrifyingly powerful psionic ray suddenly burst forth. You want the Mind Stone? Then take it. Take it all. Chi chi chi. Heart energy rays comparable to thermal melting beams swiftly pierced the Weaver Carlos's remaining giant bird head, continuously melting and destroying the opponent's chaotic flesh. Ah! An incomparably tragic howl echoed incessantly from the opponent's broken bird beak, reverberating throughout the entire orbital platform. Simultaneously, as the Weaver Carlos, facing immense crisis, abruptly brandished a thick arm. Blood-colored psychic energy chains, using your anger and desire for slaughter as raw materials, continuously emerged from between your massive frame, with many even flailing wildly in midair. In the next second, 7 great demons of Tzeentch, flapping their massive wings back and forth, utilizing the endless wind force that carried chaotic psychic energy, arrived in an instant, completely dispersing the green poisonous mist. Emitting vicious roars from their giant bird heads, they all reached out and grabbed those blood-colored psychic energy chains condensed by chaos sorcery, forcefully dragging the frenzied you repeatedly away from the Weaver Carlos. Rumble rumble. Just at this moment, beams of enormous light, with diameters far exceeding buckets, roared past the upper diagonal of the orbital platform. The terrifying power of the laser beams forcibly broke through part of the chaotic seal, and at the same time, melted and penetrated a great demon of Tzeentch that was unable to evade in time, sending it back into the warp. At this moment, the Warbringer-class Titan, indomitable, from within the Titan forge slowly moved its extremely heavy metallic body and stood tall upon the ruined earth. This machine of the gods had actually, under the diligent maintenance of a large number of tech priests, begun to move again. Buzz buzz buzz. At the same time, along with the low, muffled buzzing sound emitted by the jump pack, Captain Titus, with a halo of iron mounted on his power armor and a metal helmet on his head, led 2 fully armed ultramarines and swiftly ascended into the airspace above the orbital platform. Damn great demons of Tzeentch, no enemy of the Emperor shall escape punishment. Captain Titus, gripping a thunderhammer tightly in both hands, suddenly emitted an earth-shattering battle roar. Glory to Ultramar, for the Emperor and the Primarch. He swiftly controlled the jump pack that emitted dazzling light, his tall frame like a blue cannonball fired from a gun, heavily crashing from midair into those great demons of Tzeentch who were forcefully dragging you. The other 2 ultramarines also raised the heavy firepower weapons in their hands, unleashing a continuous barrage of fire at the great demons of Tzeentch in midair. Ha! You, who were being forcefully dragged by the great demons of Tzeentch, could not help but let out a roar that reverberated around. Your pair of magnetic boots were forcefully stomped deep into the platform surface. You abruptly stretched out a thick arm covered in a vibranium shell, your vibranium palm burning with psychic flames, grabbing the top blood-colored psychic energy chains. Whir! In the next second, the formidable strength of your massive body, already not much weaker than a great demon of Khorne, came into full play. 2 great demons of Tzeentch who intended to forcibly contend with you were actually dragged down from midair by you. Boom! You swiftly activated your vibranium power armor, leaping into the air with a terrifying speed comparable to a great demon of Slaanesh. 2 vibranium iron fists burning with psychic flames also heavily smashed down onto the giant bird heads of the 2 great demons of Tzeentch. Obviously, these nameless and faceless ordinary great demons of Tzeentch were completely inferior to the more resilient Weaver Carlos. Your massive body, braving countless chaotic sorceries that attacked from midair, swiftly knocked the 2 great demons of Tzeentch in front of you heavily to the ground, and then hammered 4 giant bird heads to pieces. Pung pung pung. Just at this moment, before you could fully react, the Weaver Carlos's ornate staff, accompanied by a terrifying whistling sound, slashed through the air and suddenly attacked the back of your spine. Along with the booming sound of the vibranium shell on the back of your power armor colliding fiercely with the ornate staff, your massive body was also violently sent flying towards the distance of the orbital platform. Snap! At this moment, those blood-colored psychic energy chains, condensed from the anger and desire for slaughter within your massive frame, had reached a state of extreme limit. In the blink of an eye, they snapped in the middle, also allowing your entire being to temporarily break free from the control and restraint of several great demons of Tzeentch. Boom boom boom. Almost at the same time, Captain Titus, repeatedly wielding his thunder hammer in his palm, also collided fiercely with several great demons of Tzeentch who were flapping their massive wings. The thunder hammer that the opponent desperately wielded, even with the cooperation of the Warbringer-class Titan's volcano cannon, temporarily suppressed several great demons of Tzeentch completely between the platform surface. Even though the densely packed chaotic sorceries summoned by the great demons of Tzeentch incessantly bombarded Captain Titus's tall frame, it also caused the gradually heavily injured opponent to be unable to help but emit continuous angry roars. But very quickly, an invisible sorceress defensive barrier silently appeared around Captain Titus's tall frame. Even when the opponent, under the protection of the Emperor or other gods, successfully hammered to death a great demon of Tzeentch that had unfortunately been contaminated with psychic flames, the suddenly recovered injuries and physical strength also made the opponent's desire for battle and will become even more intense. Rumble rumble. Your massive body wearing vibranium power armor heavily crashed onto the platform surface, countless gravel and rubble immediately splashed out in all directions. The serious injuries within your body had just appeared, and were completely restored to a perfect state by a seemingly endless life force. You abruptly activated your vibranium power armor and flipped yourself up from the depths of the ground. The corner of your vision unintentionally saw through the lenses, the Dawnbreaker Warhammer that you had casually thrown on the ground. Without any hesitation, you grabbed the Dawnbreaker Warhammer. A large amount of pale golden blood flowing out from the position of your palm instantly wrapped the entire Warhammer into a terrifying weapon burning with psychic flames. Carlos. Your gaze stared fixedly at the battered Weaver Carlos not far away. You emitted an earth-shattering roar from within your skull helmet. You swiftly controlled the propulsion device that continuously erupted with dazzling light, your massive body once again charged head-on towards the opponent. Damn human Primarch. I will extract your soul and scorch it with psychic energy. I will cut your flesh and blood into 1,000 pieces. At this moment, one broken bird head silent, the other bird head seriously injured, the Weaver Carlos seemed to have completely forgotten its schemes and purposes. The ornate staff tightly gripped in the opponent's palm waved back and forth, the massive body entwined with purple-blue light carried an even more terrifying psychic energy fluctuation, and rapidly launched a reverse charge with astonishing momentum towards your front. Bang! The Dawnbreaker Warhammer you gripped in your palm collided heavily with the ornate scepter of the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, carrying terrifying psychic flames. Visible waves of chaotic psychic energy suddenly erupted outwards. Chi. The magnetic boots on your feet moved rapidly, and you unhesitatingly unleashed the elusive Shadow Step. Simultaneously, strands of even more conspicuous and distinct dark shadows seemed to coalesce into a pair of enormous raven-feathered wings behind your broad back. And the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, under the intense burning of the psychic flames and the suppression of countless dark shadows, gradually felt a fatal illusion of being overwhelmed. Bang, bang, bang. The heavy warhammer, wrapped in psychic flames, repeatedly hammered against the massive body of the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, almost causing him to stagger backward with each blow. And the chaotic sorcery that the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, excelled at was essentially ineffective against you. Even if some chaotic spells that could temporarily weaken and deprive you of your powerful strength and agility were successful, the greater blessings from the Chaos Gods quickly compensated for these minor issues. Perhaps Tzeentch's unauthorized dispatch of the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, to intercept and speculate, had aroused the dissatisfaction of the other gods. Since they could use you, an excellent vessel for blessings, to create obstacles for him, this was something the Chaos Gods were completely happy to see happen. Rumble. With you, your entire body wreathed in a mass of dark shadows, once again forcefully swinging the Dawnbreaker Warhammer, it slammed heavily into one of the Weaver of Fates, Kairos's thick legs. The chaotic flesh and bone that continuously burst outwards caused the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, to let out a low moan and kneel heavily on the ground. The next second, you activated your adamantium power armor and strode forward, your entire massive body leaping into the air at a speed that was difficult to catch with the naked eye. The Dawnbreaker Warhammer, forcefully raised above your head, carried an extremely terrifying roar and a large amount of intensely burning psychic flames, completely shattering the Weaver of Fates, Kairos's gigantic bird head. Roar. No longer able to struggle, the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, only had time to emit a final roar filled with unwillingness and anger, before his massive body crashed heavily towards the ground, and then rapidly evaporated and dissipated. At this moment, you, who had just accomplished a great feat, had no time to exclaim. You quickly tightened your grip on the Dawnbreaker Warhammer in your palm, and your massive body immediately turned and charged towards Captain Titus, who was being besieged by several greater demons of Tzeentch. Chi. You, as a whole, seemed to temporarily transform into a gigantic shadow raven, crashing heavily onto the chaotic body of a greater demon of Tzeentch. Immediately afterwards, the Dawnbreaker Warhammer, which you wielded with all your might, quickly shattered the opponent's two gigantic bird heads. At the same time, Captain Titus, who was already exhausted and covered in wounds, seemed to be infected by your terrifying combat power and indomitable will as a Primarch. For the Emperor, he suddenly raised his head and let out a roar that resounded throughout the surroundings, and the thunder hammer he swung back and forth repeatedly struck the massive body of a greater demon of Tzeentch, finally sending it back to the depths of the warp. Subsequently, the other party, whose strength and injuries seemed to have been restored, quickly joined your terrifying offensive against the other greater demons of Tzeentch. Not long after, when the last greater demon of Tzeentch, who wanted to flap its huge wings and escape the orbital platform, was repeatedly hammered by you and Captain Titus, and its huge bird head was forcibly smashed. The 9 greater demons of Tzeentch, led by the Weaver of Fates, Kairos, were completely annihilated here by you and the others. Although you must have received indirect blessings from the Emperor and the other gods to be able to achieve such a terrifying level. But this is undoubtedly a glorious battle worthy of being recorded in the history of the Imperium. Thump. At this moment, you, who slowly retracted your skull helmet, placed the Dawnbreaker Warhammer, which you held tightly in your palm, heavily on the ground, emitting a muffled rumble. The dark shadows that were wrapped around your massive body and the raven-feathered wings behind your back were gradually dissipating, returning to lurk within your body. The interior of your entire body was filled with a large amount of blessings from the Chaos Gods. The murmurs and whispers from them faintly echoed in your ears. You took a deep breath, barely using your indomitable will to forcibly suppress the corruption and enticement from chaos. But you also understood that if you allowed this situation to continue, even if your soul and consciousness were protected by the Emperor, they would not last long. Thump, thump, thump. The next second, 2 Ultramarines, who had landed heavily with their jump packs, picked up the blood scythe surrounded by green light from not far away, and they carefully sent the melee weapon towards you. And Captain Titus, who was originally kneeling on one knee due to exhaustion, also lifted his metal helmet, revealing his pale, square face. Primarch, are you all right? This may be the most difficult battle I have ever experienced since becoming an Astartes, facing the greater demons of chaos in person, and still 9 greater demons, and still not completely dead. This is simply the Emperor's blessing. Captain Titus, his eyes somewhat vacant, muttered to you. You slowly activated your adamantium power armor and sat down on the ground. The corners of your mouth twitched slightly, but you didn't say anything. The place where you, the Primarch, descend will gradually become an intense battlefield with a serious situation. Countless descents seem to have verified this unspeakable law or curse. Primarch, your melee weapon, the Ultramarines veteran knelt on one knee, respectfully handing the blood scythe surrounded by green light to you. You took a deep breath and slowly activated your adamantium power armor to stand up from the ground. You were just about to say something to him and Captain Titus. But the Ultramarines recruit, who was standing quietly to the side, suddenly said to you tremblingly. Primarch, according to the procedural requirements of the Codex Astartes, all of us must accept review and isolation from the Inquisition. You and Captain Titus not only faced several greater demons of chaos, but were also completely bathed in extremely dense chaotic psychic energy, so we must. Recruit, are you out of your mind? How dare you say these things to the Primarch? Who gave you the courage? At this moment, the Ultramarines veteran, who quickly stood up, suddenly raised a magnetic boot. He kicked heavily on the side of the other party's power armor, even directly knocking the other party to the ground. At this moment, even Captain Titus, who was kneeling on one knee, subconsciously frowned and couldn't help but tighten his grip on the thunder hammer in his palm. New recruit, the Codex Astartes is just a set of guidelines. My brother Gilliman wrote it as a reference for you Astartes, not for you to treat as an unchangeable and pedantic dogma. You stared down with indifferent eyes at the Ultramarines recruit lying on the ground. You had to forcibly suppress the urge to completely blast the other person's head off, and said calmly. Recruit, you haven't learned to trust the veterans beside you, your battle brothers. You also haven't chosen to trust your superiors, Captain Titus. You trust even less your company commander and the librarians. Now, you don't even trust the Primarch. As an Astartes, you have completely failed. As an Ultramarine, you are absolutely unqualified. At this moment, the Ultramarines veteran standing beside him made a fierce judgment on the recruit lying on the ground, full of disappointment. The next moment, Captain Titus, with his thunder hammer gripped in his palm, slowly activated his damaged power armor and stood up from the ground. He first glanced at your emotionless bronze face, and then stared at the recruit whose face was changing back and forth. However, just as Captain Titus gritted his teeth in secret, planning to raise the thunder hammer in his palm, you suddenly stopped his movement and said to the crowd in front of you. Although the recruit's words and actions are very problematic, there are some things he didn't say wrong. My body has been contaminated and corrupted by chaos and absolutely cannot be left behind. It must be destroyed as soon as possible. As soon as you finished speaking, Captain Titus and the Ultramarines veteran, looking increasingly panicked, immediately turned around and knelt on one knee in your direction, activating their power armor. Absolutely not. Primarch. You are overthinking it. My current method of arrival is more like a warp demon. My true body is not here, this is just a useless shell. You shook your head at the two of them and said calmly. You lowered your head slightly and stared at the blood side in your palm. You raised a hand made of auramite again, smearing the pale gold emperor's blood on the sharp edge. Immediately afterward, wisps of slowly burning psychic flames flickered once again in the thin air. Captain Titus, next time we meet, would you be interested in being a company commander in my legion? Don't worry, I'll tell your Gene Father Gilliman. You stared at Captain Titus, whose expression was grave, and said slowly. As soon as you finished speaking, Captain Titus suddenly widened his eyes, and he asked with an expression of disbelief. Primarch, are you saying? That's right. In the distant future, Primarch Gilliman has successfully returned. You gripped the blood scythe in your palm and said to Captain Titus and the others with certainty. Time is almost up. The whispers from chaos are getting more and more serious, and I should leave too. Oh, right. If I leave behind any power armor or weapons after I kill myself, you don't need to report it to the chapter. Just keep it for yourselves. You once again instructed the trio of Ultramarines kneeling on the ground. You suddenly swung the blood scythe burning with psychic flames in your palm, and the sharp edge sliced across your entire thick neck without any hesitation. Your head seemed to spin back and forth in midair, and even the remaining massive body was completely enveloped by the raging psychic flames. Your fading, dim vision noticed Captain Titus, with a look of grief, getting up from the ground, trying to reach out and catch your falling head. Your remaining consciousness completely broke free from the shackles of the body and quickly ascended to a higher place. You quickly left the forge world of Gallia, and even the cold void of the universe. You seemed to enter the legendary Sea of Souls. And just before your consciousness completely sank into darkness, you also seemed to see the consciousness belonging to Doom and Fulgrim slowly drifting over from other timelines. You are dead. This simulation is over, time unknown. The retainable options for this simulation are as follows. Psychic disaster, energy source, chaos, please choose carefully. Note: this is a byproduct inadvertently researched by Inquisitor Drogon after being corrupted by chaos, in the process of weaponizing psychic energy. Note: this energy source will spontaneously generate incomparably pure chaos psychic energy. A powerful being proficient in psychic sorcery can use it to do many things, such as summoning a portal, or an even more powerful warp demon. Note: however, prolonged exposure of the flesh to pure warp energy is more likely to trigger flesh mutations, and will also be subject to the invasion and harassment of warp demons. Most importantly, the initial birth of the energy source may also have been secretly guided by the Changer of Ways. Note: damn human Primarch, the feud between you and me is not over yet. I will definitely be back. Two bird heads swaying back and forth, the Weaver of Fates, Kyrus, squats in the maze of Tzeentch and roars to the sky. 2. Warlord Class Titan, Invincible, Common. Note: Warlord Class Titans are the most widely deployed in numerous Imperial Battle Titans in the Titan Legions, and their usage is also the most diverse, and their combat power is second only to Emperor Class Titans. Note: it is said that the ancient history of existing Warlord-class Titans can be traced back to the early Great Crusade, or even the Dark Age of technology, making them even older than the human Imperium itself. Note: Warlord-class Titans possess 6 or more void shield generators, as well as a massive metal structure forged from adamantium, enough to withstand the volley of 50 heavy vehicles or artillery platforms, and the presence of powerful firepower such as Gatling blasters and volcano cannons is enough to make a Warlord-class Titan walking on the battlefield unstoppable. Note: Hey, Emperor on high, I haven't gotten in the car yet. The esteemed Titan Princeps and his auxiliary mechadendrites watched helplessly as the Warlord-class Titan disappeared from their sight. 3. A chance to obtain the Gloriana-class battleship, Fist of Iron, unique, please choose carefully. Note: Gloriana-class battleships are one of the most powerful spaceships ever built by the human Imperium. It is said that the earliest design source can be traced back to the ancient era when humanity had not yet stepped out of the solar system. During the Great Crusade, the size and appearance of the Gloriana-class battleships owned by different legions were completely different, so each Gloriana-class battleship is a unique and irreplaceable item, and also represents the noble status and supreme glory of each Primarch. Note: Unfortunately, the current human Imperium has completely lost the basic ability to rebuild Gloriana-class battleships. Even if someone issues an order in the name of the Primarch, it is difficult to have a Gloriana-class battleship again. Note: This seems to be the Emperor's reward for you completing an extremely difficult battle and finding several Primarchs. Note: Regardless of whether you successfully acquire ownership of the Gloriana-class battleship, you will be teleported back after a certain period of time. Please carefully consider all the actions you take to acquire the ship. Perhaps you can complete the operation to recover this Gloriana-class battleship with the help of the entire Iron Hands chapter. Note: A bloody grand stage, I dare you to come. A massive figure sitting on a brass throne, with a pile of broken skulls and a river of blood under his feet, murmured to you in a deep voice. The number of throne tokens consumed for this simulation is 3. Current throne tokens held, 15. The simulation had just ended. Rogar quickly opened his eyes. He didn't immediately check the simulator page for the numerous rewards. Instead, he focused his gaze on Fulgrim and Doom, who were also opening their eyes. Where did you guys go this time? Was the battle difficult? Rogar asked curiously, blinking a few times at the two who were still savoring their experiences. Brother, perhaps it was the Emperor's will, but I didn't encounter any difficult battles. I almost completely relived my life on Chemos, growing from an ordinary worker into the recognized leader of Chemos. Fulgrim, whose demeanor and temperament had subtly changed, said softly to Rogar. For a clone like me, those memories were just memories, but now they've truly become a part of my life. Moreover, my approach and methods for handling things are completely different now. Perhaps this is the result the Emperor wanted to see. Rogar nodded upon hearing Fulgrim's words. He took a deep breath and said, Brother, this is actually a good thing. When you can relive the past, you can make up for many regrets and mistakes in life, thereby perfecting yourself. Doom, what about you? Were you thrown into a chapter? Or did you experience even more difficult battles alone? In response to Rogar's question, Doom frowned slightly, pondered for a moment, and then said to Rogar. Lord Rogar, the Emperor threw me into the Grey Knights chapter. I grew from a near-death recruit into a qualified Grey Knight neophyte, ultimately dying in a battle against a great unclean one of Nurgle. Grey Knights. I only know one of their Grand Masters, I haven't really seen the other companies. Rogar nodded. He muttered to himself. Rogar wasn't surprised by Doom's simulated experience. Such exceptional psychic talent would be too much of a waste if only used as a mortal psyker. Next, Rogar was finally able to turn his attention back to the rewards after completing the simulation. He glanced at the first reward a few times and completely gave up on it. It was entirely a double-edged sword, perhaps with miraculous effects on certain battlefields. But in terms of side effects like corruption and flesh mutation, it wasn't very useful. As for the second reward, the existence of a Warmaster-class Titan. Although it was temporarily useless for the Primarch fleet, it was an invaluable and important asset for Leman Russ and even the homeworld. Of course, Rogar didn't plan to train Titan Princeps. Firstly, the training process was too cumbersome and difficult, and secondly, the success rate was even lower than creating Astartes. He planned to have Lehman Russ and Tony Stark research a fully controllable artificial intelligence to replace the role of the Titan Princeps. As for the opportunity to obtain the last Gloriana-class battleship, Rogar couldn't help but shake his head and slowly let out a sigh. If he wasn't mistaken, it was likely that, like the previous Emperor-class battleship, there would be attention and ambushes from the Chaos Gods. Let's talk about it later. If I had to choose which ship to use as a flagship, I would still choose the Gloriana-class battleship. At least Khorne's side doesn't have any tricks, all you have to do is kill. Tzeentch's side must have a huge conspiracy waiting for me. Rogar slowly closed the simulator page without immediately making any reward choices. He casually complained to Doom and Fulgrim beside him. Whiz, whiz, whiz. The Primarch fleet, maintaining a defensive formation, continuously launched brilliant lances of light and continuous laser beams from a large array of weapons. Countless space torpedoes also streaked across the cold void like a scattering of celestial flowers, detonating on the massive bodies of the Tyranid bio ships. A short time had passed since Rogar and the others completed their simulated training. After Rogar led Fulgrim and the Terminator Guard in 5 more prayer supports. The Primarch fleet, which had just completed a warp jump, finally encountered a sizable Leviathan Hive fleet head-on in the void lanes of the Imperium's dark side. Rumble. At this moment, more than a dozen Sword-class frigates and Cobra destroyers were forcibly sunk by the numerous Tyranid void units, constantly undergoing extremely terrifying detonations and disintegration. Several strike cruisers were also separated from the Primarch fleet's massive formation by the hive mind, with the Astartes companies on board engaging in extremely difficult and fierce resistance battles. Even though the quick-reacting Rogar had ordered Doom to use teleportation technology from the homeworld to rescue most of the mortal crew in advance. At least 1 million mortal crew members and mortal servants were completely buried in the cold void. And this was just the first phase of this encounter battle. Even more difficult boarding actions had not yet begun. These are all the spaceships I've painstakingly accumulated. My mortal crew can die for the Imperium, but they shouldn't die so easily at the hands of these damned Tyranids. Rogar, with a vague expression, heavily slammed a vibranium power fist onto the metal round table in front of him. He gritted his teeth and let out a muffled roar of burning anger. This included both the pain of the Primarch fleet suffering heavy losses and the helplessness of having to choose to sacrifice mortals. Even though the Astartes under his legion were supernaturally powerful, they didn't have any good solutions against such a large Tyranid fleet, they could only resist it head-on. Brother, this is the fate of countless Imperial mortals, and it is also the duty of the Astartes. Even we, as Primarchs, cannot change this. Fulgrim, Doom, and Iron Man David and the others standing aside exchanged glances. As an elder brother, he had to step forward to comfort Rogar. Brother, you still don't understand how I feel now. Can you imagine your beloved things being torn apart by a group of naughty children, and then eaten? No, I can't hold back anymore. I'm going to give this hive fleet a lifelong unforgettable lesson. At this moment, Rogar, gritting his teeth, slowly raised a vibranium palm. Strands of colorful T-Online divine power were flowing outward from inside his massive body. Buzz, buzz, buzz. In the next second, above the cold void of the entire Primarch fleet, as an extremely massive pillar of 5-colored light suddenly bloomed. A phantom dragon head, comparable in size to a planet, slowly extended from inside the 5-colored light pillar. And that even larger phantom body quickly condensed above the Primarch fleet. Damn hive mind, pay for my ships and crew. Rumble rumble. A terrifying torrent of energy spanning the icy void suddenly erupted in the center of the formation of a large number of Narwhal-class bio ships. The extremely terrifying destructive power instantly cut a Narwhal-class bio ship in half. Even the powerful shockwaves generated by the continuous explosions gradually tore apart the tightly arranged fleet formation of the hive mind. In the next second, the heavenly Kirin beast's incomparably large void body, wrapped in the heavy anger from Lorgar, suddenly streaked across the icy void, crashing head-on into the entire hive fleet. Chi. Two enormous illusory claws fiercely embedded themselves into the thick armor of a narwhal-class bio ship. The massive illusory body, rolling out of thin air, also crushed countless Tyranid void units. And regardless of the violent collisions from the narwhal-class bio ships, or the terrifying acid or bio torpedoes launched by a large number of void units, they were completely ineffective against the heavenly Kirin beast, which was immune to physical attacks. At this moment, on the thick deck outside the flagship, Trazyn, wielding the empathic obliterator and the Tesseract labyrinth to capture Tyranid void units, looked up and stared at the heavenly Kirin beast's mighty offensive. He couldn't help but let out a silent, hearty laugh from within his silver skull head. Boom boom boom. At the same time, the Primaris fleet, which had been heavily surrounded by the Hive fleet, also quickly launched a more intense counterattack. A large number of ships about to be destroyed were brought back into the fleet. Subsequently, the entire fleet immediately launched a continuous assault towards the weaker defensive areas of the Hive fleet. In an instant, many Narwhal-class bio ships and Tyranid void units, having their attention drawn by the heavenly Kirin beast, were continuously and severely damaged by the fierce attacks from the Imperium of Man. A small portion of the fleet even temporarily fell into a state of command confusion. And this gave the heavenly Kirin beast, controlled by Lorgar, an even better opportunity to attack. About a dozen Narwhal-class bio ships were completely torn into flying pieces of flesh and blood by him. As for the Primaris fleet, with its unparalleled firepower, it naturally also obtained a good opportunity to completely escape. A large number of ships rapidly sped into the deeper reaches of the icy void. Even the heavenly Kirin beast, whose massive illusory body soared back and forth, vanished into the icy void after repeatedly spewing out torrents of energy a dozen times. Not long after, inside the massive bridge on the upper level of the flagship, Waterwraith, Lorgar and Fulgrim, wearing Auramite power armor, were in conversation with an elderly navigator. Respected Primarchs, our fleet is currently unable to enter the warp for a jump. The psychic interference from the Tyranid fleet continues to affect the special abilities of our navigators, preventing us from clearly seeing the many turbulent currents within the warp. Forcing a jump would be too dangerous. The leader of the navigators, who had served the Carcharodons for many years, said with a solemn tone. As soon as his words fell, Lorgar, his brow furrowed slightly, turned his head to Fulgrim beside him and said, "It seems the hive mind is still unwilling to give up. It's actually continuing to pursue our fleet, regardless of the consumption of a large amount of biomass. This is completely illogical and doesn't fit the Tyranids' behavioral patterns. Brother, I'm afraid it's more than that. According to repeated calculations by the ship's Auspex arrays and the intermittent psychic communications we've received, more than a dozen hive fleets, large and small, are converging together towards our fleet's direction. I remember you said that the Tyranids should only have basic desires such as feeding and devouring, right? So what are these Xenos planning to do now?" Fulgrim, who had been looking down and examining the holographic projection, also said to Lorgar. After pondering for a while, Lorgar took a deep breath. He said with a solemn expression, "I currently have a suspicion and a conjecture, and that is that the heavenly Kirin god force, which is completely different from psychic energy, has completely attracted the hive mind's attention. Even if it has to pay the price of several hive fleets, it wants to find out the specific situation and source." At this moment, both Fulgrim and Lorgar temporarily fell into silence. If Lorgar's speculation was true, then this was undoubtedly terrible news. Unless the two of them chose to use their Primarch status to order the Imperial fleets within the entire sector to form a large-scale coalition, it would be possible to resist the continuous pursuit from a large number of hive fleets. But in the Imperium Nihilus, where communications were poor and the situation was chaotic, this was simply an impossible task. Dong dong dong. Just then, Trazyn, wielding the empathic obliterator, swayed his silver metallic body and stepped into the bridge. Fulgrim, with a detached expression, glanced at Trazyn but did not acknowledge him. Respected Primarch, you seem to have encountered some difficulties. Do you need me, Trazyn the magnanimous alien consultant, to help you solve your problems? Before his words could finish, Lorgar, hearing Trazyn's words, said without looking up, Trazyn, I'm not in the mood to joke around with you right now. Speak if you have something to say, and stay away from me if you don't. Trazyn, whose deep eye sockets were flashing with a faint green light, seemed to turn a deaf ear to Lorgar's words. He hugged the empathic obliterator and slowly said to the two Primarchs. Respected Primarchs, I have just learned the bad news that our fleet has been targeted by the Tyranids. If you don't want to lose too much manpower, then I do have a solution. Although the execution process and methods are very dangerous, it is worth trying. What do you think? At this moment, Lorgar, who suddenly raised his face, and Fulgrim, who was standing beside him, exchanged a glance. He quickly blinked his eyes and stared at Trazyn in front of him, saying, Trazyn, tell us about it. If it's really suitable, I can count it as a meritorious service for you. As long as the merit is sufficient, it's not impossible for me to take you to Terra for negotiations. Aha, respected Primarch, I've been waiting for you to say that. Hearing Lorgar's words, Trazyn slammed his metallic palm. Without any hesitation, he said to the two Primarchs in front of him. Do you know a combat tactic called the kite tactic? Although this analogy may not be appropriate, I believe that these persistently pursuing hive fleets are actually an extremely suitable cleaning tool. Our current location is quite close to a Necron dynasty called Canoptek. Although their Farron and I are both of the Necron race, there are some small grudges between us, so I don't really care about the life or death of their dynasty. Our fleet can take this opportunity to divert the disaster eastward, letting a large number of Tyranid hive fleets engage in a series of attrition battles with the Necron dynasty. Of course, if this small Necron dynasty is indeed useless, then please rest assured, I also know the exact locations of several Orc empires. As long as our fleet can successfully escape, then the subsequent war will not be much to do with us. There was even no need for too much cautious consideration. Trazyn's ingenious and malicious plan immediately gained the approval and affirmation of Lorgar and Fulgrim. To exchange the annihilation of countless aliens for the safety of the entire fleet was a worthwhile deal no matter what. As orders were swiftly issued, almost all the mortal crew members within the fleet busied themselves once again. And when a detection array composed of rows of shipborne auger arrays captured traces of a large Tyranid hive fleet at the edge of a star system. A dozen Cobra destroyers with the fastest sailing speed, under Lorgar's command, took on the dangerous task of attracting the hive mind's attention. These captains had to ensure that the hive fleet constantly pursued them, instead of turning around to devour other Imperial worlds in nearby star systems. The rapidly departing Primarch fleet also distanced itself from the Cobra destroyers, each fighting its own battle. Embarking on the void route to the Canoptek Necron dynasty. Soon after, the Primarch fleet, traversing the entire star system at maximum speed in real space, successfully arrived at a tomb world called Bardic. And in order to fully awaken the tomb world and get it moving, several strike cruisers from within the fleet, under Trazyn's enthusiastic command, even launched a sparse orbital bombardment on the tomb world. Sure enough, after the orbital bombardment ended, a densely packed Necron army began to appear on the barren surface of the tomb world. Even a Necron fleet, with a Scythe-class harvester ship as its flagship and dozens of Jackal-class raider ships as escorts, rapidly sailed into the cold void from the back of the tomb world. However, at this moment, the Primarch fleet, which had already activated its void shields, did not immediately engage in combat, even when subjected to the Necron fleet's frantic firepower. Each massive ship maintaining a tight defensive formation seemed to be waiting quietly for something. Buzz buzz buzz. In the next second, with a dozen Cobra-class destroyers kiting back and forth, a terrifying Tyranid hive fleet with nearly 100 hive ships quickly appeared within the detection range of the Primarch fleet and the Necron fleet. At this moment, the Primarch fleet, enduring the Necron fleet's firepower, immediately increased its sailing speed to the limit in real space. Countless ships rapidly sped away in a frantic sprint away from the tomb world. And even though the commander of the Necron fleet, the Pharaon of the Canoptek dynasty, suddenly realized the humans' malicious plan. The Necron dynasty, with the tomb world located directly in the path of the Tyranid Hive fleet, had no choice but to immediately prepare for war, in order to meet the terrifying onslaught of the endless Tyranid swarm. Trazyn's plan was undoubtedly successful. Although the Canoptek Necron dynasty was ultimately completely overwhelmed by the endless Tyranid swarm. Their heroic resistance successfully bought the Primarch fleet a great deal of time to escape. Regrettably, however, just as the Primarch fleet had safely sent half of its ships into the warp, the pursuit from the terrifying Tyranid Hive fleet followed like a shadow. Lorgar, without hesitation, had to forcibly halt the remaining fleet's warp jump. A large number of escort ships turned around and engaged in an even fiercer firefight with the vanguard fleet of the Tyranid Hive fleet. At the same time, the majority of the remaining fleet also quickly sailed forward, attempting to replicate the special tactic of shifting the blame. Unfortunately, luck was not always on the side of the Imperium of Man. Having not yet found the traces of the Orc Empire, the Primarch fleet, after losing 15 escort ships, finally barely escaped the heavy encirclement of the terrifying Tyranid Hive fleet under the cover of a warp storm. At the same time, a shrine world called Shadowfall unexpectedly appeared on the Primarch fleet's route. If Lorgar ordered the fleet to pass it by, then this shrine world would definitely become a target for the Tyranid Hive fleet to devour. Therefore, for the sake of the countless mortals above, Lorgar and the others temporarily ordered the fleet to stay in Shadowfall's near-planetary orbit. Chirp chirp chirp. Several Thunderhawk gunships with roaring engines swiftly cut through the bright azure sky. Also skimming over the countless towering spires of buildings in the Shadowfall capital, Rausov, before heavily landing in a vast cathedral square. Clang! In the next second, as the doors of the aircraft gradually opened, Lorgar in Oromite power armor and Fulgrim, whose purple-gold power armor glimmered slightly, quickly stepped out of the Thunderhawk's interior. Priests of the Ecclesiarchy, immediately have your leader come to see me. I am the 22nd Primarch of the Imperium of Man. Lorgar, with an indifferent expression and cold eyes, looked down upon the Ecclesiarchy priests and mortal believers who were quickly gathering around. At this moment, facing the disappearance of half of his fleet, the Primarch was in an extremely foul mood. He was already too lazy to show a more amiable attitude to other mortals. Thud thud thud. Before long, accompanied by a series of heavy footsteps approaching from afar, a squad of Grey Knights in Aegis-patterned Terminator armor hurriedly traversed the dark shadows cast by the cathedral buildings, quickly arriving before Lorgar and Fulgrim. At this moment, the Grey Knights, their brows filled with excitement, knelt on one knee towards Lorgar without any hesitation. Grey Knights Chapter, Chief Librarian Cadulian leading a battle squad, pays respects to the Primarch. Before the other party could finish speaking, Lorgar, slowly activating his Oromite power armor, quickly stepped forward. His suddenly brandished Oromite power fist unexpectedly and without warning struck the resolute face of the Grey Knight's chief librarian. Boom! In the blink of an eye, the tall body of this Grey Knight's chief librarian heavily crashed to the ground. The other party's overly heavy body quickly pressed a huge pit, several inches deep, into the ground. At this moment, even though Lorgar's fierce offensive did not stop in the slightest, neither the Grey Knight's chief librarian, who was being used as a large punching bag, nor the Grey Knights who were kneeling on one knee without raising their heads, dared to stand up and resist. Because Lorgar, who had the Emperor's blood flowing within him, was, to some extent, the gene sire of the entire Grey Knights chapter. Cadulian, is it? Do you know why I'm beating you? At this moment, Lorgar, whose eyes grew colder, activated his Oromite power armor and leaned over slightly. He gently asked the chief librarian, who was constantly spitting out blood, a question. Subsequently, Lorgar used only one burly arm to lift this Grey Knight in Aegis Terminator armor from the ground. Primarch, I think I know. I clearly received the withdrawal order from the fleet, but I forcibly prohibited the planetary governor's evacuation plan. The Grey Knight's chief librarian, with an indifferent expression, quickly swallowed a mouthful of blood. He said unclearly to Lorgar, who was close at hand. Boom! The moment the other party's voice echoed in the surrounding air. Amidst the exclamations of countless believers and priests around, the chief librarian's entire tall body was once again kicked away by Lorgar. Chi. The librarian, clad in Saint-patterned Terminator armor, had not yet fully landed. With a cold gaze, Rogel Dorn unhesitatingly activated his Auramite power armor, and the magnetic boots on his feet swiftly deployed Shadow Step. In an instant, he, wrapped from head to toe in wisps of dark shadows, caught the other's towering body from midair. Subsequently, Rogel Dorn's icy gaze fixed upon the librarian's resolute face, inches away, and he said in a deep voice, "You Grey Knights were forged by the Emperor himself from the very beginning as a sharp blade, but he did not intend for you to betray the expectations of mortals, completely abandoning your duty as protectors of the Adeptus Astartes. I can pretend not to know about everything you've done in the past, and I won't investigate it, but now you are still committing the most foolish sin of arrogance, just like those custodes who needed good thrashing. Am I, a Primarch, not capable of commanding you Grey Knights? Or are you hoping to be executed on the spot by me?" At this moment, the words spoken by Rogel Dorn, as a Primarch. For the Grey Knights, it was already a very serious accusation. Even if the High Lords of Terra or the upper echelons of the Inquisition were to arrive, they would not dare to openly refute it. As soon as Rogel Dorn's voice fell, the Terminator squad, who had come together on the Thunderhawk transport, had already deftly drawn their melee weapons from the power armor's waist. The bolters, gripped tightly in their hands, also firmly locked onto every kneeling Grey Knight. However, at this moment, Fulgrim, with a nonchalant expression, slightly shook his head, causing his long white hair to scatter. He immediately raised his hand to stop the Terminator squad's next action, while also saying to the surrounding crowd, "I believe my brother would not go so far as to indiscriminately kill the innocent. He is merely somewhat consumed by anger because of the temporary loss of half the fleet, and this Grey Knight librarian just happened to be caught in the crossfire. Their offenses do not warrant being killed on the spot." The next second, Fulgrim, his gaze shifting back and forth, stared at Rogel Dorn's massive back. He patiently advised, "Little brother, calm down. I think this librarian brother from the Grey Knights also has his difficulties and reasons for resisting the orders we issued. You should give him a chance to explain, and if he truly has no more reasonable explanation, how about I personally send them on their way afterward?" At this moment, Fulgrim's words made Rogel Dorn subconsciously take a deep breath. With narrowed eyes, he forcibly suppressed the anger that was constantly surging up from the depths of his heart. Then, Rogel Dorn casually placed the Grey Knight librarian he was holding in his palm heavily on the ground. "Librarian Kadoran, for the sake of your Grey Knight brothers, even if you have to make something up, you must give me a reasonable explanation." Rogel Dorn, his icy gaze looking down at the other party, slowly said in a low voice. And Librarian Kadoran, who had just temporarily escaped from the Primarch's clutches, knelt heavily without any hesitation. Lowering his head, he seemed to reorganize his words, and then, as concisely as possible, said to Rogel Dorn in front of him, "Lord Primarch, everything I have done is out of necessity. Beneath the ground of Ralsaneth, the capital of the Shadowstar, lies a large pile of corrupted and contaminated ancient technological devices. This place was discovered by the acolytes from the Inquisition and was named the source of the Maelstrom. The specific origins of these evil technological devices are unknown. The ancient age can even be traced back to the dark age of technology, and with the passage of time, it will continue to emit stronger and stronger warp power, stirring up even more terrifying psychic fluctuations. The most important point is that any actions and attempts to completely destroy these evil technological devices have been declared a failure. This is also the real reason why our Grey Knight battle squad is stationed here for a long time. We must perform a sealing ritual every day to ensure the safety of the source of the Maelstrom. But once we choose to leave this place, the arrival of the Tyranid Hive fleet will inevitably destroy the underground seal, and even trigger a large-scale chaos invasion in the local star sector, which is also an unavoidable event. As soon as Librarian Kadoran's voice fell, Rogel Dorn's deep voice echoed in the other party's ears. So, for the sake of a mere chaos seal, you intend to drag the millions of mortals on the entire Shadow Star to their deaths with you. You Grey Knights are really good at calculating. Didn't you ever think about letting the Chaos Demons who break the seal fight against the Tyrannid swarm that lands on the ground? This is a simple tactic that even a mortal warrior would know. At this moment, Rogel Dorn forcibly resisted the urge to directly smash the other party's entire head. He activated his Auramite power armor and turned to look in Fulgrim's direction, asking in a deep voice. Brother, according to the Iron Man David's precise calculations, how much preparation time do we have left before the arrival of the Hive fleet? Approximately 3 to 4 solar days. Even with the influence and error of the warp storms, it will not exceed 7 solar days at most. Fulgrim, his expression becoming serious, said to Rogel Dorn after only a moment of recollection. That's about enough time. Rogel Dorn, taking a deep breath, shook his head. He immediately shouted loudly to the surrounding mortal believers and ecclesiarchy priests. I will, in my capacity as Primarch, issue an immediate order to evacuate the entire world. My fleet will also send down more transport vehicles to provide you with more assistance. Now, I need you to spread my words completely. Use whatever means necessary, the faster the better. At this moment, as Rogel Dorn's deep voice gradually echoed in the surrounding air, every devout mortal believer and completely excited ecclesiarchy priest turned and ran towards the depths of the city streets. They will use their talents and abilities to do everything they can to convey the evacuation order from Lord Primarch. At the same time, Rogel Dorn, his icy gaze turning back to Librarian Kadoran, seemed to gradually calm the anger in his heart. After a moment of silence, he suddenly asked the other party. Grey Knight, are you willing to fight to the death for the Emperor and humanity? Lord Primarch, this is our sole duty from birth. We are willing to atone for our previous shameful behavior with slaughter. At this moment, whether it was Librarian Kadoran or the Grey Knight squad kneeling nearby, they raised their heads, their incomparably firm gazes fixed on the Primarch's massive body, and shouted in a deep voice. With faith as armor, dedication as shield, and purity as sword. For the great Emperor, for the Gene Sire. We will go through fire and water, even to our deaths. Rumble rumble. With the continuous roar of engines, the azure sky was almost completely covered by countless flying vehicles. Often, even a ray of light could hardly fall on the ground, only patches of shadow repeatedly shrouded the earth. A large number of Thunderhawk transport aircraft from within the fleet and Astartes transport ships from the Shola Progenium were rapidly shuttling between the surface and the fleet, constantly transporting countless civilians and necessary supplies. According to a series of orders issued by Rogel, they had to evacuate the entire Shadow World completely before the Tyrannid Hive fleet truly arrived, striving not to give the Tyrannids any chance to replenish biomass. At the same time, 2 Cadian infantry regiments, 1 Vistroyan Firstborn regiment, and a large number of ecclesiarchy militias and defense forces were rapidly building circles of defensive positions centered on the 3 elevator towers supporting the near-orbit defense platform. These mortal warriors would become sweet bait to attract the Tyrannid Hive fleet to launch a landing operation. Even though Rogel had arranged for Doom, the most familiar with teleportation barrier technology, to personally oversee the command. But how many mortal warriors could survive in the end was also unknown. This was undoubtedly a necessary sacrifice. Even if Rogel personally explained the dangers to countless mortal warriors, and even allowed some to retreat. But not a single one of them chose to withdraw from the positions in advance. And that was why Rogel, as a Primarch, was unwilling to abandon any mortal unless absolutely necessary. Simply because the spiritual will of countless mortals was worth his combat and dedication as a Primarch. Deep beneath the capital city of Rosov, Rogel and Fulgrim, clad in Auramite power armor, were personally led by a squad of Grey Knights. Quickly traversing countless complex and winding underground passages and deep tombs, heading towards the specific location of the source of the maelstrom. Soon after, when the group once again passed several extremely ancient technological devices, a massive metal disc, firmly covered by countless sealing rituals, appeared within the sight of Rogel and Fulgrim. This is the so-called source of the maelstrom. At this moment, Rogel, with a calm expression, turned his head to look at Librarian Kaldan beside him and asked, "Lord Primarch, this is it. Our main task every day is to repeatedly reinforce the sealing rituals here, but perhaps this place is connected to the depths of the warp, or perhaps these technological devices themselves have unknown effects. Countless blasphemous chaos runes will rapidly erode the sealing rituals. Without continuous reinforcement or actively choosing to destroy them, Shadow World will sooner or later become a paradise for chaos demons." Hearing Librarian Kaldan's words, Rogel did not reply immediately. His gaze was fixed on the source of the maelstrom, not far away, and he quickly pondered in his mind how to utilize this important location. "Brother, are you sure you want to execute this extremely risky plan? Chaos is never an easy object to exploit." At this moment, Fulgrim's deep words slowly fell into Rogel's ears, also temporarily breaking his state of contemplation. Truthfully speaking, once the Tyrannid Hive fleet descends, Shadow World's final outcome will be to become a truly dead world. Perhaps there is a possibility of restoring the ecology in the future, but the chances can be said to be slim. Rogel said in a calm tone. "So, I have simply slightly modified Trazen's strategy of driving away wolves and devouring tigers. In this way, it can solve the chaos problem brought about by the source of the maelstrom, and also solve the problem of the Tyrannid Hive fleet relentlessly pursuing us, which can be said to kill two birds with one stone. At the same time, I have ordered Tiberius to activate 2 bipolar torpedoes from the flagship, Hydra, and he is leading the entire company to work hard on a more precise excavation and deployment, allowing the bipolar torpedoes to be completely aimed at the stellar core direction of Shadow World. Soon after, once the entire Tyrannid Hive fleet launches a large-scale landing plan, and the chaos demons inside the source of the maelstrom also descend one after another, I will take the opportunity to detonate the bipolar torpedoes, using this planet, which is about to become a dead world, as the price to completely end the fighting sides." At this moment, Rogel's almost complete disclosure of the battle plan made Fulgrim, who was also a Primarch, couldn't help but widen his eyes. And the Grey Knights standing around seemed to be shocked by Rogel's terrifying idea. They did not make any sound, just silently staring at the 2 Primarchs in front of them, as if once again refreshing their understanding of the Gene Sire. "Brother, I have not found any major flaws in your complete plan. The only problem is, after our fleet withdraws all the mortals, without the flesh and souls of a large number of sacrificed people, how do you plan to lure out the chaos demons inside the source of the maelstrom? The corpses of the Tyrannids alone are probably not enough, right?" Fulgrim, with a slightly furrowed brow, pondered for a moment. He pointed out a flaw in the entire plan for Rogel. However, at this time, Rogel, who let out a low chuckle, slowly raised a Oramite palm. He seemed to be touching something invisible out of thin air. The next second, the psychic cataclysm energy source from the simulation rewards was quickly extracted by him into the palm of his hand. "Remember the training rewards I told you about? In the past, things similar to chaos needed to be completely discarded by me. Now this thing can barely exert some residual heat." As soon as Rogel's words fell, without waiting for Fulgrim to speak, Grey Knight Librarian Kaldan, who had been silent for a long time, said in a solemn tone, "Lord Primarch, please be careful, the chaos psychic energy contained in this thing is too pure and primitive, and from my psychic perspective, the warp power stored inside seems to be endless. Kaldan, no need to worry, I of course know what this thing is. I think it is also enough to attract a batch of chaos demons with a suitable number and quality." Rogel, squinting his eyes, suddenly flipped his Oramite palm. The energy source that was constantly emitting chaos psychic energy was instantly absorbed into the internal storage page, temporarily isolating it from all contact with the outside world. Truthfully speaking, if our fleet had not been targeted by the Tyranid hive mind, and even needed to face a massive Tyranid hive fleet far exceeding the past scale, I would not want to get involved with these special things from chaos, but since all things have finally developed to this point, I must also take out my responsibility and commitment as a Primarch. Continue to prepare for this upcoming war, my brothers. Boom boom boom. When the last batch of Thunderhawk transports carrying the mortals successfully leapt out of the atmosphere and entered the lower decks of the major ships. With a launch order from inside the bridge of the flagship, Kraken. Every ship, large and small, began to accelerate its engines, heading towards a course away from Shadow World. And on the surface of the planet, countless mortal warriors who still chose to stand their ground also subconsciously looked up. They gazed at the bright trails in the brilliant night sky. Many Cadians couldn't help but hum an old ballad widely circulated among the common people of the Imperium of Man. As for the specific meaning of this little tune, it is from the perspective of an onlooker, praising a mother who personally sent her adult children to join the Cadian Guard. The great story of how she still chose to pick up the gun at hand to fight against the invading traitors after facing the tragic situation of all her relatives dying for the Emperor. And according to what Luo Sha knew, this is also a true story that happens every day in the endless territories of the Imperium of Man. Dong dong dong. A series of heavy footsteps temporarily interrupted Luo Sha's somewhat drifting thoughts. He activated his vibranium power armor and turned to look. Immediately, he saw two Grey Knights wearing Nemesis Dreadnought armor slowly stepping out of the secret warehouse that had been sealed up. This powerful mechanical creation, which can briefly contend with or even kill a greater demon of chaos to a certain extent, is only equipped by the Grey Knights. Moreover, only the elite Astartes among the Grey Knights can perfectly control it. It seems that in order to fight against the ensuing Tyranid swarm and chaos demons, Kaldor Drago, the Grey Knight's Grand Master, has also put the combat power at the bottom of the box on the table. At this moment, Luo Sha, who turned his gaze, saw Fulgrim walking towards him. One of his ceramite gauntlets never loosened its grip on the hilt of the sonic blade, while the other ceramite gauntlet held several portions of high-protein food to replenish his strength. Fulgrim, you should actually listen to my arrangement and temporarily leave this star system with the fleet. If there is only me on the battlefield, even if I choose to run away, there will be no worries. Luo Sha said to Fulgrim in a half-joking tone as he reached out to take several portions of food. And as soon as Luo Sha's voice fell, Fulgrim, whose white hair danced in the wind, stared at a peaceful and bright night sky, and he said indifferently, "Aren't there Tiberius and Iron Man David in the fleet? They are more suitable than me. Little brother, I know that you are much more capable than me, this clone, but since I am your brother, I must fight alongside you, and besides, doesn't Doom control the teleportation technology? Even the back of the planet hides several Cobra-class destroyers. When your plan succeeds, each of us will have a suitable retreat." Heh, what abilities do I have? If I really had the ability, I would block the Eye of Terror every day, and if I didn't like which Chaos faction, I would just crush their planet. Luo Sha, who sneered, swallowed the cold food without raising his head. And Fulgrim didn't speak when he heard the complaint. He just raised a ceramite gauntlet and gently patted Luo Sha's vibranium shoulder armor. 2 Primarchs. The Deep Space Reconnaissance Array has detected a large number of signals belonging to the Tyranid fleet appearing at the edge of the star system. The guests we have been waiting for have finally arrived. At this moment, Doom's deep voice quickly emanated from the communication channel. It also completely broke the brotherly and respectful state between Luo Sha and Fulgrim. Luo Sha, who gradually narrowed his eyes, forcibly swallowed all the food into his stomach, and he said in a calm tone, "The damn hive mind doesn't even let people finish a meal in peace. Come on, brother, let's start killing." As soon as Luo Sha's voice fell, Fulgrim, whose expression became more and more solemn, suddenly drew out the sonic blade hanging on the waist of his power armor. Strands of terrifying sonic waves visible to the naked eye flashed and disappeared on the cold and sharp blade. Buzz buzz buzz. Rumble rumble. One by one, the collapsing near-Earth orbit defense platforms became the most eye-catching sparks in the entire night sky. A large amount of metal wreckage fell towards the surface of Shadow World like a rain of meteorites. Because no fleet was left to resist, the 3 near-Earth orbit defense platforms were completely destroyed by the increasingly terrifying Tyranid fleet in just 1 hour, which also completely lost Shadow World's air defense capabilities. Buzz buzz buzz. In the next second, countless spore cysts carrying Tyranid combat units crashed towards the ground. And the mortal warriors who had been waiting for a long time also turned their guns or heavy firepower weapons one after another, completely playing the sound of destruction belonging to Shadow World. Rumble. Countless whirlwind missiles and large-scale artillery fire from heavy vehicles continued to rise into the air, repeatedly exploding around the outer periphery of the circle after circle of solid positions. A large number of hormagaunts and termagants that had just left the spore cyst wall instantly became pieces of flesh and blood splashing everywhere, but they were quickly recovered and rebuilt by those ripper swarms that appeared on the pitted ground. Before long, the fierce attacks from many mortal warriors gradually weakened. Because more warrior swarms continued to appear between the large number of hormagaunts and termagants. Because there were no organized Astartes companies to resist and behead, mortal warriors had to use heavy vehicles to barely maintain the first line of defense and position. However, at this time, a larger and faster prime warrior seemed to have seized the opportunity, unleashing a wanton and terrifying charge against a corner of the mortal warrior's position. In an instant, countless mortal warriors who bravely killed the enemy became flying limbs and broken arms, with no power to fight back at all. Dong dong dong. In a flash of lightning, Fulgrim, wearing purple gold power armor on his huge body, rushed towards the prime warrior with flexible steps like a purple whirlwind. The sonic blade he held tightly in his palm quickly danced. One after another, supersonic air-splitting slashes that made terrifying howls kept chopping on the chitinous carapace of the prime warrior. Chi-chi-chi-chi. In the next second, Fulgrim, who passed by the huge body and the prime warrior who let out an angry roar, suddenly retracted the sonic blade inward. An ugly head belonging to the prime warrior had completely separated from the shackles of the body and fell heavily into the pitted ground. For the Emperor. At this moment, Fulgrim, whose thoughts returned to the Great Crusade era in a trance, subconsciously let out an angry roar that resounded over the battlefield. His whole person did not hesitate to drive the purple gold power armor and launched a swift charge towards more attacking warrior swarms. Deep beneath the capital city of Rosov, the Tyranids' crazed assault from the Tyranid swarm had not yet spread here. In front of the massive metallic disc known as the source of the maelstrom, Rorschach, clad in vibranium power armor over his massive frame, was maintaining a state of closed-eyed meditation within his skull helmet. The green glowing blood side was casually thrust into the ground beside him. And on the data panel inside the skull helmet, countless casualty numbers from mortal warriors and the extent of territory lost were rapidly updating. Even with the Primarch Fulgrim and the Grey Knight squad's nemesis dreadnoughts joining the battle early, and even successfully beheading several nodal hive tyrants. But the Tyranid swarm that had arrived at Shadowstar was the combined force of over a dozen Tyranid fleets, and even the legendary hive mind was paying closer attention to this war. Therefore, neither in quantity nor quality could the hundreds of thousands of mortal warriors withstand such a terrifying war with their fighting spirit alone. As time rapidly passed, when the terrifying Tyranid swarm had occupied nearly every inch of Shadowstar's surface, and the heavily injured mortal warriors were reduced to less than a third, on the verge of complete annihilation. Buzz buzz buzz. Accompanied by the buzzing sound from inside the vibranium power armor, Rorschach, whose eyelids were slightly closed, abruptly opened his eyes. Taking a deep breath, he quickly activated the vibranium power armor, and a massive hand swung out to tightly grip the blood side in front of him. In the next second, countless ancient seals and ritual items used to repeatedly seal the source of the maelstrom were completely destroyed by the sharp blade. Chirp chirp chirp. Strands of thick, visible warp energy rapidly leaked out from the interior of the source of the maelstrom to the outside world. The more Rorschach's powerful arm swung, the more cracks appeared on the giant metal disc. Rumble. With a sudden tremor of the ground and the flashing of countless profane runes. A terrifying warp power, suppressed for countless years by the Grey Knight's seals, suddenly surged upwards towards the sky above the source of the maelstrom. Wearing the skull helmet, Rorschach quickly activated the vibranium power armor to leap backwards, the massive vibranium wings rapidly transforming into propulsion devices that emitted brilliant energy. Crack, crack, crack. Just then, as a gradually forming warp gate suddenly appeared within Rorschach's field of vision. 4 massive figures, each representing a different chaos god, were rapidly manifesting in the depths of the violently surging warp energy. At the same time, Rorschach, his expression indifferent, quickly retrieved a warp anomaly energy source from his storage interface, clutching it tightly in his other vibranium hand. Haha, I actually smell incredibly familiar warp energy, it's the aura of the Changer of Ways. A vague voice, seemingly containing cunning and treachery, slowly spread out from the warp gate. I only want skulls and blood. I'm not interested in your conspiracies and tricks. Whoever dares to stop me, I'll chop them down. Another angry voice, low and rumbling like thunder, roared. Hee, be patient, the great Nurgle often teaches us, if there is no rotting soil to nourish and cultivate, where can we grow the precious fruits that nurture countless diseases? A cheerful, honest voice faintly echoed in Rorschach's ears. Tisk, you human Primarch are truly courting death, don't you know that your demon brothers have already told all the greater demons of Slaanesh everything about you? At this moment, a non-male, non-female, yet infinitely alluring deep voice forcibly drilled into the depths of Rorschach's mind. HMPH. Rorschach, inside the skull helmet, merely shook his head, letting out a cold snort. Relying on his extremely tenacious mental willpower, he completely drove away the corruption and teasing of a greater demon of Slaanesh. He quickly raised the energy source in his palm and muttered to himself. Don't you guys want to eagerly enter the material universe? Then I'll help you out now. As soon as Rorschach finished speaking, a large amount of extremely pure warp energy suddenly bloomed outwards from the interior of the energy source. And with the appearance of more warp energy, the warp gate, which could only accommodate some low-level demons, suddenly expanded a lot. Boom, boom, boom. In the next second, an almost endless legion of chaos demons instantly poured out from inside the warp gate. At the same time, 4 chaos greater demons of varying sizes also landed heavily in the depths of Shadowstar's underground. These were the 4 chaos greater demons known as the Fearsome Foursome, and the demon forces they commanded. Normally, greater demons belonging to different chaos gods would often squabble upon meeting. But the 4 chaos greater demons in front of Rorschach seemed to have been cooperating for a long time, and even possessed a certain amount of prestige and fame in the depths of the warp. Aha, human Primarch, have you finally seen the light? The great chaos gods will surely reward all your hard work. My master Tzeentch welcomes you to join her ranks. At this moment, the greater demon of Tzeentch, its massive wings flapping back and forth, suddenly raised the scepter in its palm, shouting loudly towards Rorschach's direction. The other 3 chaos greater demons also stared at Rorschach, the human Primarch, with different expressions. At this moment, the silent Rorschach casually hung the energy source, which was releasing even more warp energy, on his waist. He held the blood scythe in one hand, and his massive body controlled the propulsion device behind the vibranium power armor, slowly rising into the air. You disgusting chaos greater demons, you're thinking too much. Rorschach's cold voice, transmitted through the skull helmet, spread through the warp-filled air. I just had a whim and wanted to use your greater demon heads to practice. As soon as Rorschach finished speaking, Roar, the greater demon of Khorne, suddenly letting out a deafening roar, immediately brandished the Gorefather axe in its palm. Without any hesitation, it launched a terrifying, imposing charge towards Rorschach in front. Countless bloodletters wielding hellblades also followed the greater demon of Khorne's steps, swarming forward. At the same time, as the greater demon of Slaanesh, with a contemptuous gaze, gently waved its slender arm. Countless demonettes and fiends wielding demonic blades also quickly launched a swifter charge and assault towards Rorschach's direction. Goodbye, you chaos idiots. However, at this moment, Rorschach, who had just struck a formidable pose, abruptly controlled the propulsion device to flip his massive body. Without looking back, he sped away towards the depths of the previously scouted underground tunnel. Rumble. The capital city, almost submerged by countless tyrannid termagants and hormagaunts, seemed to be experiencing extremely violent tremors and rumbles. As more frequent collapses echoed from beneath the ruined streets. Terrifying heatwaves also rose from the depths of the ground fissures that were gradually tearing apart. At that moment, a golden figure, its massive body surrounded by scorching dust and shattered rubble, violently smashed through a narrow crack and quickly levitated dozens of meters into the air. Boom boom boom. Almost simultaneously, with even more terrifying roars. A great unclean one of corn, a massive figure about 8 meters tall, wielding a corn axe, its blood-red wings just severed by sharp blades, rushed out of the fissure first. With bloodshot eyes, it raised its ruined head, missing a long horn, and glared at Roja in midair, roaring with immense anger. Damn Primarch vermin! Dare to come down and face me! At that moment, the roar from the great unclean one of corn quickly echoed in the surrounding turbid air. And a large number of bloodletters wielding hellblades surged out of the underground fissures like a tide of crimson. Kacha! In an instant, countless tyrannid gaunts and hormagaunts, just overturned by the violent tremors, quickly changed their direction of attack. Under the control of several Norn emissaries, they fearlessly launched a continuous, frenzied assault on the chaos demons. In fact, the tyrannid swarm, driven only by the desire to consume, was not interested in chaos demons. As purely warp entities, chaos demons quickly return to the depths of the warp after death. Moreover, they leave behind no flesh that can be digested into biomass by the tyrannids. Conversely, the warp shadow passively carried by the hive mind greatly restricts the psychic powers of the chaos demons, significantly weakening their combat effectiveness. But now, both sides have a focal point to fight over, and that is Roja himself. Having already wasted a large amount of biomass, the hive mind naturally did not want Roja to fall into the hands of the chaos demons, and the united chaos legions have never feared any enemy. Chi. In the next moment, a large number of bloodletters wielding hellblades clashed head-on with the astonishing number of tyrannid gaunts and hormagaunts. Countless chitinous carapaces and the severed limbs of chaos demons flew everywhere. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Roja, quickly manipulating his propulsion device, ignored the great unclean one of corn on the ground. He suddenly drew an arc in midair, rapidly maneuvering to face the tyrannid gargoyles and winged hive tyrants that were flying towards him. Lorgar, Doom, prepare to lead the remaining forces to evacuate Shadowfall. I will hold the rear alone. At this moment, Roja, whose blood reaver's sharp blade suddenly disemboweled a tyrannid winged hive tyrant, shouted in a deep voice inside his skull helmet. He slightly tilted his body, narrowly dodging the fierce impact of several tyrannid gargoyles. His massive body immediately changed direction, quickly flying into the higher night sky. Rumble. At the same time, Lorgar, whose purple-gold power armor was covered in scars, used his sonic blade to cleave a bloody path through countless tyrannid gaunts and hormagaunts like a humanoid war machine. After hearing Roja's voice in his ears, he immediately changed his charging direction and ran towards Doom, who was unleashing terrifying psychic lightning in midair. Retreat! Retreat! Everyone, retreat immediately! Buzz buzz buzz! Only a few dozen seconds later, blue teleportation barriers quickly appeared around the surviving mortal warriors. And after all the mortal warriors were safely teleported to the Cobra-class destroyer, Lorgar, who was constantly slashing out air-splitting strikes, and Doom, who was desperately erecting a huge psychic barrier, as well as the Grey Knights squad, with only Librarian Kaldan and a Contemptor Dreadknight remaining, quickly left the completely fallen Shadowfall battlefield. Rumble. At this moment, the ground of the entire city street quickly collapsed. The Nexus of Slaanesh, which had become a large warp gate, began to constantly spew out tens of thousands of chaos demons. A massive chaos fortress also quickly rose into the air, emitting extremely terrifying chaos psychic fluctuations. The 4 chaos greater demons, known as the foursome of abominations, obviously did not want to easily give up this imperial world that was about to fall into their hands. They summoned almost all of their demon troops to Shadowfall. And the hive mind, which was equally unwilling to give up, also chose to launch a greater number of spore cysts from the Narwhale-class bio ships onto the ground battlefield. Countless massive living artillery spore mines and pyrovores, mixed with Tyrannid hive guard, appeared in the depths of the Tyrannid swarm. And countless blood crushers riding copper bulls, personally led by the great unclean one of Khorne, launched a terrifying charge towards the endless Tyrannid swarm. TZZ. Perhaps sensing the difficulty of the Tyrannid swarm, the great unclean one of Tzeentch, constantly waving his scepter, and the great unclean one of Nurgle, tightly gripping his putrid blade, actually began to chant blasphemous chaos incantations together. In the next second, in the depths of the dark night sky where layers of dark clouds rolled, a stinking rain mixed with countless blood and bile, carrying the wails of tormented souls, fell on the earth. The city buildings that had once existed were quickly melted into a purulent plain like a red-green mud sea, and temporarily trapped the Tyrannid swarm, whose numbers were difficult to count, in place, enduring the fierce counterattack of the chaos demons. Boom boom boom. Countless pink horrors and blue horrors, summoned by chaos sorcery, held and pounced on the Tyrannid warrior, which had fallen into the purulent mud, constantly spewing out amazing magic fire. And the massive Tyrannid hive guard forcibly tore apart one Slaaneshi demon and bloodletter after another that launched an encirclement. But it was completely submerged in the depths of the ground by piles of Nurglings that swarmed up with giggles. However, this situation favorable to the chaos demons did not last long. As time went on, the Tyrannid swarm, stepping on countless Tyrannid corpses and constantly advancing, quickly adapted to the chaos demons' fighting style. Under the hive mind's constant mobilization, Tyrannid Molochs quickly appeared on the edge of the chaotic battlefield, and soon became heavy combat units that most chaos demons found difficult to deal with. And when a large number of bioplasma cannon-firing biovores appeared, the chaos demons' battle attrition ratio became even more alarming. Chi. Covered in Tyrannid blood and gore, Rourke, encased in his vibranium-powered armor, was desperately flying towards the edge of the atmosphere. Not long ago, after the Chaos Fortress belonging to the greater demons of chaos was successfully summoned, and the hive mind had brought forth even more Tyrannid creatures. Knowing that he couldn't stay here for long, Rourke had already planned to leave the Shadow Fringe system and detonate the bipolar torpedo buried deep within the crust, sending countless Tyrannid hives and chaos demons to their doom together. However, the hive mind, seemingly fixated on Rourke's existence, had mobilized a large number of Tyrannid aerial units from the very beginning of the war to relentlessly pursue and intercept him. Even though Rourke repeatedly manipulated the propulsion devices, constantly performing precise and agile maneuvers in the dark night sky, he still found it difficult to shake off the entanglement of numerous Tyrannid harpies and gargoyles. Fortunately, before long, the putrid rain summoned by the chaos demons interfered with the Tyrannid aerial units, temporarily giving Rourke a good opportunity to quickly escape. Buzz buzz buzz. He quickly adjusted his flight attitude, accelerating the propulsion devices behind him to their maximum state. He shot towards the edge of the atmosphere like a golden meteor. As long as Rourke could escape the constraints of the atmosphere and the planet's gravity, then his flight speed, even faster in the cold void, would ensure he wouldn't become a sacrificial pawn on the Shadow Fringe system. Boom boom boom. Just then, terrifying psychic fluctuations from the ground, along with the Nurgle greater demon's unwilling roar, quickly echoed in Rourke's ears. He didn't even need to turn his head to look back. He could guess that the hive mind had used some means to forcibly send a chaos greater demon back into the warp. At this moment, Rourke, feeling a faint sense of crisis rising from the depths of his heart, violently waved a vibranium hand. The next second, a detonation device, which had been stored inside the storage page, suddenly appeared in his giant palm. Gotcha. At this moment, Rourke, about to leave the atmosphere of the Shadow Fringe system, pressed the button without any hesitation. Boom boom boom. Instantly, a series of sudden earthquake-like roars erupted in the turbid air filled with chaotic warp energy and a bloody stench. The chaotic battlefield on the entire Shadow Fringe system seemed to pause temporarily. Countless chaos demons and tyrannid swarms, who were slaughtering each other, seemed to sense impending doom. They stopped their killing actions simultaneously. At the same time, between the night sky of the Shadow Fringe system at dawn, a series of colorful aurora-like magnetic fields also quickly appeared within the observation range of the three Chaos Greater Demons in the hive mind. Even the Khorne Greater Demon, whose only thought was slaughter, knew that this magnificent spectacle was not a good sign for a planet. This was an abnormal and spectacular scene caused by countless magnetic fields going haywire. Rumble rumble. Only a few seconds passed before the continental plates of the entire Shadow Fringe system began to experience a series of extremely alarming collisions and collapses. If someone were standing in the cold void, looking down, they would immediately discover that in the center of the battlefield where countless tyrannid swarms and chaos demons were engaged in combat, a giant sinkhole vortex, which was constantly expanding, had appeared on the planet's surface. And this was the terrifying gravitational collapse caused by the Shadow Fringe system's core being completely detonated by the bipolar torpedo. At this moment, countless chaos demons and tyrannid swarms didn't even have a chance to struggle before being completely crushed into dust by the ultimate destructive force of the planet's destruction. Even the Chaos Greater Demons, who reacted quickly and wanted to summon a warp gate to escape from this place in a panic, were unable to fulfill their wishes due to the warp shadow interference from the hive mind and the powerful oppressive force brought about by the planet's destruction itself, and could only wait for death on the spot. Even more astonishing was that, as the entire Shadow Fringe system gradually collapsed and was destroyed, the Narwhal-class bio-ships, which were stationed in the planet's near-Earth orbit, were also unable to escape the fate of being firmly bound by the rampaging gravity. These tyrannid swarms' living warships could only desperately fall towards the depths of the gradually destroyed Shadow Fringe system, completely becoming one of the sacrifices of this grand war. However, at this moment, Rourke, who was fortunate enough to stand above chaos and tyrannids, and ultimately become the victor of the war, didn't feel any joy. The massive body of his vibranium-powered armor was making terrifying deformation sounds. The propulsion devices behind him were constantly spewing out brilliant energy rays, trying to allow his entire body to completely escape the planet's constant gravitational pull, and move away from the collapsing Shadow Fringe system. Chi. Inside the skull helmet, Rourke couldn't help but sink his teeth deep into his lip. A trace of pale golden blood had already flowed into the depths of his throat. But his massive body was still rapidly tumbling back towards the gradually destroyed Shadow Fringe system. Buzz buzz buzz. In the blink of an eye, a dazzling blue teleportation barrier that suddenly appeared beside Rourke quickly enveloped his massive body. Boom. The next second, Rourke, whose vision was suddenly spinning violently, heavily knelt on the cold, hard metal floor. The skull helmet covering his head quickly retreated. A large amount of pale golden blood was spewed out of Rourke's mouth in one go. "I'm fine. I won't die. Don't worry about me." At this moment, Rourke, whose massive body was kneeling on the ground, took a deep breath. He forcefully stopped Doom and Fulgrim from helping him up, and said in a hoarse voice, "Emperor protect us, I think I know why the bipolar torpedo needs at least a spaceship to launch safely. I didn't expect the chain reaction of a planet's destruction to be so terrifying. Next time I'd rather face dozens of Chaos Greater Demons alone, than enjoy this kind of special treatment again." At this moment, Fulgrim, hearing Rourke's words, exchanged a glance with Doom beside him. Fulgrim, slightly shaking his long white hair, smiled and said to Rourke, "Little brother, believe me, next time you encounter a similar situation, you will still choose the same dangerous method as always. This seems to be an obsession and madness engraved in your bones. In addition, congratulations, my brother, your plan not only drove away a large number of chaos demons, but even those tyrannid swarm fleets that have plagued our fleet for a long time were almost completely wiped out. Even if the so-called hive mind has any other ideas, that will be a long time in the future. This war, we finally won. In the depths of the frigid void, several Cobra-class destroyers, arranged in an assault formation, were rapidly approaching the Primarch's fleet stationed at the edge of the star system. Although Shadowreach was inevitably destroyed, there were no additional losses beyond the planet itself and hundreds of thousands of mortal warriors. The results achieved by Rogel and the others this time can be said to be quite dazzling. Even if Chaos Demons and even the Tyrannid Swarm are almost impossible to eradicate completely. Yet, the Imperium of Man has persevered through tens of thousands of years of ancient times by patching and mending. And with the victory of this battle, the anxiety that had always entanglement lingered in Rogel's heart seemed to lessen considerably. At least he would no longer worry about the whereabouts of the other half of the fleet. Rogel believed that the Blood Ravens Chapter Master Gabriel and the Raven Guard Chapter Master Surly were capable enough to handle any situation. Their two Legion fleets, forced to separate, would eventually reunite in Macragge. Soon after, when everyone had gradually returned to the interior of the flagship, Rogel did not immediately issue orders to set sail. After discussing it with Iron Man David, who was in charge of the fleet's supplies, he immediately announced to all the mortal crew and Astartes that a large-scale barbecue banquet would be held, open to everyone. This kind of situation is actually quite unfamiliar to the people of the Warhammer universe. It's not that the mortal populace lacks the desire or means for entertainment. It's just that countless mortal crew members and Astartes, due to their duties and the corruption of chaos, have always maintained a life of austere self-denial. Therefore, Rogel's proposal undoubtedly received enthusiastic support from a large number of mortal crew members. Even though many Astartes were somewhat reluctant, the Primarch, who had survived a disaster, had spoken, and they, as his sons, could only choose to rejoice with the people. Thus, a large-scale celebration involving the entire Primarch's fleet quickly began. Once everyone had entered the mood due to the relaxed and lively atmosphere. The traditional reserved program of the Carcharodon's chapter. The Bug Hunt, where new recruits form a combat squad to search all the ships for alien infestations, even became a long-term topic of conversation that the mortal crew members enjoyed. After a short period of rest, the Primarch's fleet once again embarked on the long voyage to the Ultima Segmentum. And Rogel and the others continued to use aid operations and prayer support within the material universe to maintain their mission to save the dark side of the Imperium. Dong dong dong. Inside the silent and empty ship passage, Doom, wearing a dark green cloak over his silver power armor, led 3 destroyer-class automata, also wearing dark green cloaks, forward. Before long, a squad of silver skulls patrolling the interior of the flagship brushed past them. Although these Astartes did not treat Doom with the same boundless worship as they did the Primarch, they still bobbed their metallic helmets up and down to show respect for the mortal strongman who was a technological genius, a psychic master, and the Primarch's confidant, among other things. Doom himself did not actually care about this. However, his status as a superior being also led him to nod in return to the Astartes. Immediately afterward, Doom, quickening his pace, led the destroyer-class automata through a series of ship passages, arriving at his destination. And within Doom's field of vision, Trazyn, holding the empathic obliterator, stared at the empty warehouse ahead, and said to Doom without turning his head. As you wished, Doom lad, this small-scale spirit-warded dead zone has been completed and is ready to be activated at any time. Trazyn, I thought you had gone with Lord Rogel to carry out the prayer support mission again. What, are you no longer interested in novel collectibles? As soon as Doom's words fell, Trazyn, slowly turning his entire metallic body, shook his silver skull head and said indifferently, I think you humans have some misunderstanding about my taste. What I actually collect is not simply a collectible, but the historical fragment that the collectible itself represents our presence. Of course, if it is a precious item similar to a gene seed Primarch, then it is also my beloved thing, and must not be missed. At this moment, Doom seemed to turn a deaf ear to Trazen's words. He simply propelled the power armor forward. A raised ceramite hand had already gently placed on a black stone obelisk that was several meters high and had a cold, hard, dark luster on its surface. This is the even more mysterious black stone technology. It's hard to imagine how you Necrons created another technology tree. Doom, whose dark green cloak faintly revealed traces of green light, muttered to himself with emotion. And Trazen, who had just approached, seemed to hear Doom's words. The other party seemed to let out a fleeting sigh, saying something that did not answer the question. All technological progress and great development in the entire universe is due to war. When a short-lived race that has been deceived for a long time faces a real desperate situation, it will either become a little dust left in the long time, or it can only choose to rise up and resist. And just right, we Necrons chose the latter. It's a pity that everything is too late, and now it seems that even if we want to replicate the miracle of the past, we can't do it. That is the past of you Necrons, but we humans still have plenty of opportunities to try. Doom, who was speaking, propelled the power armor and turned around. The dark green cloak draped over his body moved without wind. Doom 1, Doom 3, take your positions immediately. We are preparing to carry out the first, non-psychic state warp drive activation experiment. Doom, whose calm gaze moved back and forth, ordered the 2 destroyer-class automata without any hesitation. Entered the interior of the warehouse, which was heavily surrounded by more than a dozen black stone obelisks. Doom 2, immediately notify the flagship's bridge, and have the Carcharodon's chapter and the Silver Skull's chapter stand by at any time, in case of other unexpected situations. As soon as Doom's series of words fell, his gaze also fell on Trazen in front of him. Trazen, you can now activate the spirit-warded dead zone. If the warp drive does successfully enter the next stage of the experiment, then perhaps Lord Rogel will allow you to enter the homeworld. However, at this time, Trazen, whose silver skull head shook slightly, faintly let out a low laugh, interrupting the other party's words. His deep eye sockets, which emitted a faint green light, stared at Doom in front of him, and slowly said, "Heh heh, cunning Doom lad, don't think that I don't know your little thoughts with the Primarch. The reason why I choose to help you is because you will eventually come to help me. I, Trazen, am not a sucker in your eyes, I must make this clear to you." At this moment, as soon as Trazen's words fell, Doom, who also let out a low laugh, also said indifferently, "Heh heh, since that's the case, let's not bring up things that are mutually understood. Trazen, stop talking nonsense and let us start working." Buzzing, buzzing. A rapidly opening warp gate suddenly appeared on the metal floor. Immediately following, Rorschach, clad in vibranium power armor, and Fulgrim, his long white hair dancing, led the battle-scarred Terminator squad slowly into the flagship's interior. And in Rorschach's vibranium hand, an Astartes from the Alpha Legion, his limbs brutally severed and seemingly unconscious, was firmly gripped within his large fingers. Tyberos, heal this, esteemed guest, from the Alpha Legion, even if it means reattaching his limbs. The main thing is to let him personally experience the silence of the void from you Carcharodons. I need to know everything about the Alpha Legion from his mouth, especially the true whereabouts of their gene sire. At this moment, the skull helmet covering Rorschach's head quickly retracted. He spoke in a deep voice to Tyberos, who was walking towards him. The next second, the bronze face belonging to Alfarius was gradually wriggling and changing back into Rorschach's familiar features. "Little brother, are you sure the 20th Legion has 2 gene sires? And one of them is still alive?" Fulgrim, standing to the side, propelled his purple gold power armor forward. He frowned slightly as he asked Rorschach, "Brother, the only thing I can be sure of is that the Alpha Legion indeed has 2 gene sires, Alfarius and Omegan, but I'm not sure which one died at Rogel Dorn's hands back then. If Omegan died, then Alfarius is alive now. If Alfarius died, then the 20th Legion still has a chance to return to the Imperium. I mean, after being jointly beaten to a pulp by us and then saved by the Emperor. At that moment, Rorschach, squinting, stared at the Alpha Astartes being casually taken by Tiberos. He took a deep breath and turned to Fulgrim beside him, saying, "But in recent years, the Alpha Legion has committed countless blood debts, countless Imperial worlds have been destroyed by them. Even if some haven't joined Chaos, their level of harm is almost the same as other traitor legions. If we have the chance to face the Alpha's Primarch in the future, it's best if you and I don't hold back." Fulgrim nodded slightly. He agreed with Rorschach's judgment. Just like that Alpha Astartes who was captured. If Rorschach hadn't possessed the special ability to transform into Alpharius, and the suppression and attraction from the bloodline hadn't inadvertently exposed the other party's disguise, then even the two Primarchs would have almost allowed the other party to directly infiltrate the Terminator squad. Soon after, Rorschach and the others, having entered a state of rest, temporarily halted their next prayer for aid. And Rorschach also learned from Doom, who had rushed over, a piece of good news and a piece of bad news. The good news was that, in a state of complete psychic shielding, the prototype warp drive had been successfully activated. This indicated that some physical rules from the home universe could take effect here. The bad news was that once the anti-psyker field was removed, simply activating the warp drive would immediately attract a large amount of psychic energy, and even the fluctuations within the warp would be far more chaotic than before. However, Doom was very confident about this. He planned to directly proceed with the next step of the experiment. That was to completely replace the warp engine of a Cobra-class destroyer with the warp drive, to see what changes would occur during the actual activation and even the voyage. Regarding this, Doom, after much deliberation, also informed Rorschach in advance. The danger level of this experiment was extremely high. Besides the 100,000 mortal crew members potentially becoming sacrifices, it might also directly attract the attention of many Chaos demigods or other Chaos gods. Doom even secretly speculated that perhaps from the moment the warp drive was activated, Vashtor, who controlled some technological concepts, had already learned about it. And Rorschach merely lowered his head and pondered for a moment. He immediately approved Doom's next experimental plan. "Doom, I don't expect the warp drive to succeed in one go. This is an extremely long tug-of-war battle, and in our current plan, the success of the warp drive won't have much of an effect on the overall situation of the human Imperium, and it might even further shake the foundation of rule. At least the Navigator families on Holy Terra won't want to see the smooth birth of the warp drive. In my opinion, in a complete spaceship, the success of the warp drive is only one part. The popularization and application of artificial intelligence may also provoke opposition and dissatisfaction from the Martian Mechanicum. Although I usually don't pay attention to them, sometimes I have to reduce some major troubles for my regent brother. However, I can allow you to proceed with the next experimental plan. Even if the final experiment attracts Vashtor or a Chaos Greater Demon, I'm not afraid. Fulgrim and I will lead the Astartes to deal with it. I want you to remember one thing, that is, the warp drive is not important. You, who can create the warp drive, are the most important existence, understand?" At that moment, Rorschach's voice had just fallen. Doom, taking a deep breath, slowly bowed to the Primarch in front of him. To some extent, this was perhaps the true charm of Rorschach as a Primarch. Besides being the first to charge into battle, his trust and care for others were incomparable to some traitor Primarchs, or even loyal Primarchs. After Doom, radiating green light all over his body, turned and left. Fulgrim, who had been quietly listening for a long time, stared in Rorschach's direction. He said in a calm tone, "Little brother, I suddenly really want to go to the home world you repeatedly mentioned. The longer I spend time with you, the more I discover the differences between you and his Primarch brothers. Oh, sure, I've always wanted you to return to the home world with me, and I even plan to have you unleash your unique social charm to help me unite Home Terra without bloodshed." At this moment, Rorschach, casually opening the simulator page, grinned. He said in a deep voice to Fulgrim not far away without hesitation. "Ding. However, at this moment, a buzzing and vibration that only Rorschach could detect quickly echoed in his ears. Frowning slightly, he swiped the simulator page. He saw that in a row of prayer requests that had just been refreshed. Besides the 2 long-term missions occupied by Zinch and Korn respectively, a prayer request completely wrapped in golden flames was prominently displayed in his sight. Well, brother, we can't go back for the time being. The Emperor, she, is showing her power again. Clack, clack, clack. Inside the flagship, in the Primarch's private palace, squads of automated servo robots, personally commanded by the Iron Man David, were constructing a massive projection device on the cold, gleaming metal floor. Meanwhile, Tiberos the Red Wake, master of the Carcharodons, and Vazir, the chief librarian of the Silver Skulls chapter, stood not far away. Their Astartes commanders also stood around, their gazes occasionally fixed on the solemn-faced Lorgar and Fulgrim. Before long, the Iron Man David, having slightly tilted its black skull, signaled to Lorgar that everything was ready. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Its eye sockets flashing blue, it unhesitatingly activated the newly assembled projection device in front of it. As countless green projections twisted and rose, a vast star chart of the entire Imperium of Man quickly appeared within everyone's field of vision. Battle brothers, since I have called you here for a meeting, you have likely guessed that the great Emperor has personally issued a decree, and our Legion's next phase of war objectives has been determined. These are the 5 major sectors of the Imperium of Man, which you should all be familiar with. This large area circled by my fingertip is the Ultima Segmentum, also plunged into the dark side of the Imperium. And in the northern part of the Ultima Segmentum, there are 3 complete star systems that have been completely taken into the embrace of Chaos forces. It is said that the initiator and planner of this evil war is none other than the traitor Primarch, Mortarion, the second in command of the Death Guard. At this moment, Lorgar, clad in Oromite power armor, slowly stepped forward. His massive body stood in front of the projection device, a huge hand moving back and forth across the clear projection. Now, these 3 star systems are called the Scourge Stars. Countless Imperial citizens have long been reduced to the miserable playthings in the hands of the evil god Nurgle, but more importantly, the existence of the Scourge Stars is gradually threatening the jewel of the Ultima Segmentum, that is, my Primarch brother, Lord Regent Guilliman's Ultramar. As a Primarch brother, I am naturally duty-bound to shoulder the responsibility of guarding Ultramar. With a solemn expression, Lorgar activated his Oromite power armor and turned slightly. His gaze fixed on the large number of Astartes not far away, and he continued in a deep voice. Battle brothers, this will be an extremely difficult and cruel war, and it is also the first large-scale expedition of our Legion's fleet. I hope you will make all preparations for the Emperor and the Imperium of Man, and welcome the arrival of this war. For the Emperor. For the Primarch. In an instant, Tiberos, whose massive size was noticeably more eye-catching, took the lead in raising a thick arm. His pale face, like that of a dead man, roared loudly towards Lorgar and the others. At the same time, every Astartes present couldn't help but burst out with deafening roars. They expressed their unwavering faith in battle towards the Primarch. Soon after, when the last zealous Astartes left the interior of the private palace, Fulgrim, who was standing aside, activated his purple-gold power armor and stepped forward. He turned his head to look at Lorgar, who was staring at the vast star chart in a slight daze, and said softly, "Little brother, how do I remember that reclaiming the Scourge Stars was just a strategic goal we discussed, and not a true decree issued to us by the Emperor?" Hearing Fulgrim's words, Lorgar did not shift his gaze. He said expressionlessly, "Brother, do you think those ancient secrets about the Second Imperium are suitable to be revealed to the outside world? Although the current Imperium of Man is bloated and corrupt, and the situation in the dark side of the Imperium may not be stable, countless people have temporarily united because of Guilliman's return. If the High Lords in the Terran Council, or some Chaos worshippers occupying the upper echelons of the Imperium, choose to make an issue of it, it will greatly damage the Lord Regent's own prestige and reputation, and even spark large-scale rebellion incidents. If people's hearts are scattered, the team will not be easy to lead. At this moment, Lorger's deep words caused Fulgrim, who was frowning slightly, to fall into silence. In fact, according to what Lorger told him, the decree issued by the Emperor this time was actually very simple. That is to try to prevent the Nurgle demon, Rodigus Rainfather, from spreading the ancient secrets about the Second Imperium that once existed. And to completely eliminate the worries of the Lord Regent Guilliman, who is currently carrying out the Indomitus Crusade. However, it is not difficult for Lorger and others to kill a Nurgle demon with their current combat capabilities. What is difficult is to completely seal Rodigus Rainfather deep within the Scourge Stars or completely erase him from the warp in order to prevent the secrets from being leaked. And this is the fundamental reason why the well-thought-out Lorger intends to launch the Scourge Crusade. He wants to use such a large-scale apocalyptic war to deceive the world and cover up his true intentions, and to complete the Emperor's decree. Little brother, I think the current situation of the fleet makes it difficult to help you complete this Scourge Crusade. Even if we don't care about the sacrifice of countless mortal warriors, the number of Astartes is far from enough. Taking a deep breath, Fulgrim finally broke the silence. He said to Lorger in a deep voice. Lorger, with indifferent eyes, nodded slightly, and said in a low voice, "Of course I know this, so I will try my best to mobilize all the support forces I can mobilize." Before this meeting began, I had already ordered Kahulanchi, the chief librarian of the Carcharodons, to contact the homeworld. If I calculate the time, some of the Astartes recruits there should have completed their manufacturing. Moreover, the expedition to the Scourge Stars is still in the preparation stage and does not need to be carried out immediately. We must first go to Macragge and successfully join up with the other half of the fleet, and then I will mobilize the Ultramarines and their successor chapters as a Primarch. I am more confident that the Ultramarines' manpower production will not disappoint me. In the meantime, the issue we need to pay more attention to is how to seal or erase a Nurgle demon and prevent the other party from leaking those secrets. In my opinion, just 2 Grey Knights and the Blood Ravens chapter are completely insufficient. We need more Grey Knights targeting Chaos Demons, or Astartes chapters proficient in exorcism and sealing, or even better if we have Sisters of Silence who can shield psychic powers. The Emperor, she is also, since she wants us to do the dirty work, at least send me a few Sisters of Silence. At this moment, Lorger's voice had just fallen. Before Fulgrim, whose thoughts were turning, could pick up the thread. The Iron Man David, who had been standing quietly listening to the side, suddenly spoke. "My lord, Grey Knight's librarian Kadullan is waiting outside the palace to meet you, and Chief Librarian Kahulanchi has just received a reply from the homeworld. The first batch of combat personnel being mobilized are arriving inside the ship." So fast. At this moment, Lorger, who raised his head, was slightly stunned. He immediately activated his Oramite power armor and turned to take a step, while saying to Fulgrim, "Brother, you are in charge of meeting with Librarian Kadullan. See if you can get more Grey Knights support from the other party. I'm going to meet the guys from the homeworld." Dong, dong, dong. As Rorschach, slowly driving his vibranium power armor, stepped into a ritual hall in the upper deck, he immediately saw the familiar figure standing in the center of several Terminator guards, wearing dark red Sister of Battle armor on her lithe body, and carrying a masterwork power scythe on her shoulder. "Jessica, what are you doing here? Who told you to come?" At that moment, Rorschach frowned, his expression darkening noticeably. He quickly moved his magnetic boots, came directly in front of Jessica, and looked down at her with icy eyes, asking, "Do you even know how dangerous the war here is? Do you think the corruption from chaos is a joke?" Rorschach's voice had barely faded. Jessica, her brows showing a maturity beyond her years, raised her fair face. She said to Rorschach in a solemn tone, "Teacher, I believe I have made all the preparations and can face any battle and battlefield alone. Moreover, I was actually forced to come here without your permission." At that moment, before Rorschach could ask the reason, Jessica, slightly raising her eyebrows, suddenly raised a ceramite hand. She pointed to a corner of the hall that Rorschach's gaze had missed. When Rorschach quickly turned his gaze over, he immediately saw a group of bizarre fellows, completely different in both appearance and species. A humanoid rat draped in a red and black robe, with two power swords slanting behind its waist, and carrying a metal emperor statue on its slightly hunched back. A mechanical parrot with a metal shell painted in red and black, and several servo robots that were already humanoid. What made Rorschach take a deep breath was, he also saw a Deadpool who was opening his arms upward in a praise the sun pose, and the power fist, the fist of Belial, hanging on his mortal power armor. Aha, dear Primarch boss, didn't expect the Deadpool Legion to arrive, right? Since our Emperor Warlord has issued the order, we human lads naturally have to come and risk our lives. Deadpool shook his head and roared excitedly in Rorschach's direction. However, perhaps he had some self-awareness. He always maintained a very safe distance from Rorschach. Even facing the plasma tides launched by the heart of the forge could be easily dodged. At that moment, Rorschach, his eyes twitching slightly, suddenly looked at Jessica in front of him. Taking a deep breath, he suppressed the anger gradually surging in his heart and asked with great patience. Jessica, why are they here? Also, when did a humanoid rat join Deadpool's gang? Has our local battle philosophy changed? What are you keeping such a big alien for? To roast and eat. However, facing the Primarch's constant questioning, Jessica, unable to resist pressing a ceramide hand to her fair forehead, said helplessly. Teacher, these things are really a long story, let me talk about that Mr. Rat first. It started when Dr. Banner was conducting gene seed gamma radiation experiments in the Gemini Island base several years ago, and unfortunately caused some leakage. Although there were no casualties at the time, some underground things were also permanently changed by the gamma radiation. When we accidentally discovered the traces of this humanoid rat, it actually succeeded in obtaining the protection of the Emperor. It secretly learned the ecclesiarchy documents stored inside Gemini Island from a young age, and also read many human books, and gradually became a very loyal Emperor believer. It calls itself, War Rat Thrall, Saint Jerry. Its extreme piety to the Emperor allows it to occasionally exhibit some extremely amazing miracles. Reditus and ecclesiarchy Bishop Pietro held several round-table meetings with me, and ultimately determined that the existence of only one alien was harmless, and that the other party was indeed steadfast in its faith. Jessica's words made Rorschach, his expression indifferent, subconsciously turn his head to look at the war rat thrall carrying the Emperor statue. There was no panic in the depths of the other party's deep eyes, only profound knowledge and indifference. It even bowed to the Primarch in an incomparably humble manner. First meeting, Primarch Lord, War Rat Thrall Saint Jerry greets you. Taking a deep breath, Rorschach quickly withdrew his gaze. He looked down at Jessica in front of him and continued to listen to her words. As for Deadpool and his Deadpool Legion, I think you've heard that he possesses the mysterious properties of an untouchable, right? Although our experiment to use Deadpool to create Astartes unfortunately failed, the other party's ability to restrain psychers, strengthened by several surgeries, seems to have been completely stimulated. Any life that joins the Deadpool Legion and sincerely believes in his chaotic ideas will share a special force field that can completely suppress psychic abilities. Teacher, although we have never seen the legendary Sisters of Silence, we also believe that the special force field that the Deadpool Legion now possesses should be similar to it. At that moment, Rorschach, after listening to Jessica's words, blinked his eyes slightly. He gradually relaxed his furrowed brows and said to the other party in a softened tone. In other words, the Emperor actually used the Deadpool Legion for an experiment. This is a group of silent monks with psychic shielding abilities, releasing a force field similar to the WOG. Force field. Dear Primarch boss, look over here, we Emperor lads don't have the silent oath, and we're not quiet at all. How about calling us chatty chaplains or silent maniacs? Of course, I personally don't like little boys, I prefer a blonde, big-boobed womp. Rorschach's words had just fallen. Deadpool's loud voice quickly echoed throughout the entire ritual hall. At that moment, whether it was the Terminator guard standing aside, or the Carcharodons led by Chief Librarian Kulon Gil, they all focused their gaze on Deadpool's direction. Buzz, buzz, buzz. In the next second, Rorschach, his vibranium hand suddenly falling, pulled out the heart of the forge from his power armor's waist. He quickly pointed the gun in his palm at Deadpool in the distance and said in a calm tone, "Deadpool, I also understand why I hate you so much. After all, you are an untouchable, but if you don't want to restore your body, learn to shut up and read the room. Ah, the great God Emperor Warlord will remember this human lad's sacrifice and contribution. Primarch boss, don't shoot. I'll shut up now." At that moment, Deadpool, wearing mortal power armor and jumping up and down, could not escape the aiming action of Rorschach's gun no matter what. In the end, he had no choice but to give up struggling, and quickly raised his hand to make a clumsy gesture of sewing up his mouth. The entire Primarch fleet continued to make warp jumps towards the Ultima Segmentum. Meanwhile, inside the flagship, preparations for battle became increasingly busy. Buzz, buzz, buzz. As a warp gate quickly opened in the ritual hall, terrifying warp creatures, like moths drawn to a flame, surged out of the warp gate. The next second, Astartes combat teams, armed with melee weapons and bolters, and protected by vibranium shields, swiftly moved forward. They launched a frenzied assault on the numerous warp creatures, like an iron wall. The frequently opened warp gates on the homeworld and within the fleet attracted many warp creatures. If these were not dealt with quickly, more chaos demons would be drawn in. Once the Astartes had slaughtered most of the present warp creatures, the Carcharodons' librarians, who were responsible for maintaining the warp gate, gave the signal. Thump, thump, thump. One by one, Carcharodon's new recruits, standing around 2.7 meters tall with robust physiques clad in iron-gray power armor, slowly materialized on the metal floor. These were the Astartes' new recruits created from mortal berserkers through enhancement surgeries on the homeworld. In a sense, these Carcharodon's new recruits not only had significantly larger physiques than the veterans but also boasted more astonishing combat data on paper. This was because the Carcharodon's new recruits had mastered an active berserker skill comparable to Khorne's blessings. Although the Carcharodons themselves suffer from a genetic defect that causes them to go into a frenzy, it is a passive trigger that only activates in desperate situations. At this moment, the massive Carcharodon's company commander Tyberos, driving ancient Terminator armor, stepped forward. He gazed at the Carcharodon's new recruits before him with great satisfaction. He immediately began a welcoming speech for the new recruits. Not long after, the Carcharodon's great company, having received a large influx of new recruits, successfully filled its previous Astartes vacancies and expanded from 4 to 8 full companies. After Chief Librarian Kahulonji of the Carcharodons calculated the safe limits for opening the warp gate, another plan to receive homeworld support was quickly put on the agenda. Inside the flagship's private palace, Luo Shaw and Fulgrim had just finished a discussion with the rat Saint Jerry. Although Primarchs instinctively dislike Xenos, Saint Jerry's performance was nothing short of perfect. Ultimately, Luo Shaw, as a Primarch, acknowledged his existence and granted him a series of permissions. "Little brother, I think the Deadpool core is fine for now. Saint Jerry has promised to keep an eye on Deadpool to prevent him from causing any more trouble for us." Luo Shaw, letting out a breath, watched the hunched figure carrying the Emperor's statue slowly leave the palace. He spoke to Fulgrim, who was not far away, without turning his head. "And from the situation with the Deadpool core, perhaps the Emperor is more active on the homeworld than we imagined." Fulgrim, with his long white hair flowing, looked down at the projection device in front of him. He casually replied to Luo Shaw, "Little brother, the Carcharodon's great company has successfully received new recruit reinforcements, and the number of companies has reached 8 full companies. The Blood Ravens company has the fewest new recruits, with only about 1 company's worth of personnel. According to the company chaplain who came with them, first, there are too few suitable recruits, and second, the local magical talents interfere with the enhancement surgeries, leading to a very high failure rate. They are trying to find a solution to this problem. How many Lamenter's company personnel arrived? Luo Sha shifted his gaze and asked. Fulgrim, with his arms crossed, replied without hesitation. According to Iron Man David's statistics, the Lamenter's great company on the homeworld has reached 9 companies. This time, 4 companies were mobilized. If you think the number is insufficient, Iron Man David said more can be mobilized. As soon as he finished speaking, Luo Sha shook his head slightly. He said thoughtfully, forget it, no need to mobilize for now. The homeworld isn't a stable place either, keeping the Lamenter's companies there is safer. Thump, thump, thump. Just then, before Luo Sha and Fulgrim could continue their discussion, with a slightly hurried sound of footsteps, Iron Man David, with blue light flickering in his eye sockets, quickly entered the palace. He first bowed to Luo Sha and then said, My lord, you need to personally go and greet them. A company of space wolves has transited from the homeworld to the fleet. Hearing this, Luo Sha nodded heavily. He said calmly, Bjorn the Fell-Handed hasn't forgotten this matter. Come, Fulgrim, let's go meet the wolf cubs. So, accompanied by Iron Man David, Luo Sha and Fulgrim, driving vibranium power armor, quickly exited the private palace and walked towards the ritual hall. Soon after, upon re-entering the ritual hall, Luo Sha and the others immediately saw over 300 space wolves standing on the metal floor, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. At this moment, a tall figure with a large white wolf pelt draped over his heavy shoulder armor knelt without hesitation before Luo Sha, who had just appeared. Ragnar Blackmane, Wolf Lord of the Blackmane Company, leading 300 space wolves veterans, salutes Primarch. As soon as he finished speaking, this young wolf lord with black hair couldn't help but widen his eyes. While Luo Sha quickly assessed him, it was clear that this Ragnar the young wolf was also secretly assessing the Primarch. Ragnar the young wolf. Bjorn the Fell-Handed is truly generous, please rise, wild wolf brothers. How many times have I told you not to kneel as soon as you see me, your Primarch? Luo Sha, with a slight smile, immediately shouted to the space wolves before him. The space wolves, whose mood was noticeably more amicable than before, all rose. They quickly gathered in front of Luo Sha, awaiting individual greetings from the Primarch. Primarch, is this my lord also? At this moment, Ragnar the young wolf gazed at Fulgrim, who was standing beside him with a smile. He asked Luo Sha, his expression puzzled. Indeed, he is Fulgrim, the Phoenix of the Empire. Perhaps you have heard his name in more ancient stories, but now, he has been re-accepted by the Emperor and has returned to the human empire. Luo Sha, narrowing his eyes, briefly introduced Fulgrim to Ragnar the young wolf. The specific circumstances involved Demon Prince Fulgrim, so Luo Sha did not disclose them in front of the many wild wolves. The arrival of the Space Wolves' great company undoubtedly added a great deal of combat power to the Primarch fleet. Especially the addition of Ragnar the young wolf, Blackmane, further bolstered the entire command structure of the Astartes. The only problem was that Luo Sha truly couldn't spare several strike cruisers to serve as a base for the newly arrived company. So, the Space Wolves, like the Silver Skulls before them, temporarily remained inside the flagship to familiarize themselves with the environment. However, the Wild Wolves were not as obedient as the Silver Skulls. They quickly joined the fleet's ongoing aid operations with Luo Sha's permission, utilizing several Cobra-class destroyers. However, not long after, perhaps due to the overly frequent opening of the warp gate, the Carcharodon's librarians, who were planning to continue transferring 20 knight armors from the home base according to Luo Sha's war preparation plan. As soon as they opened a warp gate, they immediately encountered a large-scale invasion of chaos demons. The entire ritual hall instantly plunged into a fierce battle scene of bolter roars and chainsword swings. Fortunately, the Astartes inside the flagship, both in quantity and quality, far surpassed ordinary warbands. Countless quick-reacting silver skulls, as well as some space wolves who remained behind, quickly arrived at the ritual hall, helping the Carcharodon's librarians eliminate the continuously emerging chaos demons. And when Luo Sha, driving his vibranium power armor, arrived at the scene, he watched as Chief Librarian Kahulanji painstakingly destroyed the warp gate. With a slight frown, he immediately announced to everyone present that they would temporarily suspend the mobilization of support forces from the home base, at the very least until the ripples within the warp became more stable. Otherwise, if a true large-scale invasion of chaos demons erupted inside the flagship, they themselves would ultimately suffer greater losses. Soon after, the Primarch fleet, with all its attention focused on warp jumps, through the efforts and sacrifices of numerous navigators, finally successfully found the correct route and entered the edge of the Ultima Segmentum. With the constant flickering of the Void Shield, countless terrifying beams from laser arrays and lance arrays repeatedly cut through the cold void, continuously striking several chaos ships whose metal hulls seemed to be covered in green corrosive marks. At this moment, the Primarch fleet, having just arrived at the edge of the Ultima Segmentum, had not yet had time to find a suitable route when it encountered a small chaos fleet that had completed a warp jump. Recognizing that the enemy might belong to the Death Guard, Luo Sha gave the order to annihilate them without hesitation. Even though the current fleet was missing about half of its ships, neither its firepower scale nor the number of its ships were something a mere small chaos ships could contend with. So, when the void shields of several chaos ships completely overloaded, and even their engine systems were thoroughly destroyed, Luo Sha, driving his vibranium power armor, personally boarded a gauntlet assault boat, leading dozens of Eater of Worlds neophytes to engage in boarding combat. Boom boom boom. Several ancient gauntlet assault boats cut through the cold void, then used the melta beams installed at their front to forcibly penetrate the thick but decayed bulkheads of the chaos ships, thoroughly entering the ship's interior. As sealed hatches rapidly opened one after another, Luo Sha, holding Blood Scythe in one hand and Dawnbreaker in the other, was the first to step into a ship corridor filled with green mist. The next second, his helmet's targeting reticle quickly caught sight of a pot-bellied Death Guard dozens of meters away, who abruptly raised the bolter in his palm. Boom boom boom. In an instant, Luo Sha, wearing vibranium power armor on his massive body, charged forward, enduring the violent attacks of countless bolter rounds. He crashed into the Death Guard ahead like a suddenly accelerating steel train. Bang! Dawnbreaker, wielded by Luo Sha with immense force, descended heavily upon the enemy's rotten body, accompanied by an extremely terrifying screech. With just one strike, this silent Death Guard was completely blasted into pieces of foul-smelling flesh flying everywhere. At the same time, a dozen Eater of Worlds neophytes, quickly deploying vibranium shields and wielding chainswords, also rushed out of the assault boat in a well-trained manner. They quickly split into two combat squads, fearlessly advancing into the complex and harsh environment within the chaos ship. At this moment, Luo Sha, wearing a skull helmet, scanned the swift movements of the Eater of Worlds neophytes. Nodding slightly, he chose a random direction and delved deeper into the chaos ship. Thump thump thump. Before long, the heavy footsteps of a chaos Astartes quickly echoed in Luo Sha's ears. Deep within the wide corridor ahead, surrounded by countless plague zombies, 20 Death Guard, exuding waves of stench and putrid slime, revealed their repulsive, towering bodies. Luo Sha shook his skull helmet and casually put away his powerful Dawnbreaker. He slowly tightened his grip on the green glowing Blood Scythe. At the same time, he launched a terrifying combat charge towards the Death Guard and plague zombies ahead. Hiss hiss hiss. In an instant, an extremely brilliant green light flashed and vanished within the faint green mist. Several Death Guard, who had no time to dodge, were instantly cut in half by Blood Scythe, their incredibly tenacious upper bodies crashing heavily onto the cold floor, only to have their metal helmets crushed by Luo Sha's magnetic boots. The next second, decayed scythes, their sharp blades wreathed in green toxic mist, rapidly slashed down heavily onto Luo Sha's vibranium power armor. Luo Sha quickly performed Shadow Step, his massive body, like a wisp of black shadow, landed behind the large group of Death Guard. Then, Blood Scythe suddenly swung backward, easily sliced through the plague zombies, and then completely hacked 7 or 8 pot-bellied Death Guard into scattered pieces of flesh. Countless green viscous liquids also splattered onto the surrounding bulkheads like a downpour with Luo Shaw's offensive movements. A few minutes later, all 20 Death Guard and the surrounding plague zombies became Luo Shaw's victims under his scythe. Luo Shaw, casually flicking Blood Scythe, merely glanced down at the chaos Astartes' corpses scattered everywhere. He then mercilessly continued to stride deeper into the corridor ahead. Perhaps my combat power has increased significantly. The quality of Mortarian's offspring is truly getting worse and worse. I don't even feel any pressure using them for practice. Perhaps Typhus's company is the elite force of the Death Guard. Mortarian is truly a failed demon Primarch. Luo Shaw thought to himself as he continued to advance. Boom boom boom. The roar of bolters came from the depths of the dim passage. Jose, who reacted incredibly quickly, immediately raised the vibranium shield installed on the outside of his Dao steel arm. Specks of azure energy splattered everywhere, but they also firmly blocked the terrifying explosive power from the numerous bolters. And several Astartes brothers around him also made the same defensive movements with practiced ease. The storm bolters tightly held in their Dao steel palms were immediately triggered, unleashing suppressing fire in the direction of the enemy. The next second, Jose, who had only dealt with Chaos Astartes in countless simulated trainings and combat memory installations, displayed extremely high combat proficiency. Becoming calmer, he quickly propelled his body, which was far taller and more robust than an ordinary Astartes. The new power armor he wore, meticulously modified by my Lord Adeptus Mechanicus Redditus, subtly emitted a dense humming sound. An ancient chainsword, originally adsorbed at his waist, was also abruptly ejected into Jose's Dao steel palm. Thump, thump, thump. Jose, gradually entering a frenzied state, launched an astonishing combat charge at a running speed far exceeding that of a normal Astartes. In the blink of an eye, the ancient chainsword, its sharp teeth roaring, forcefully embedded itself into the swollen, putrid, and decaying body of a Death Guard, cutting back and forth through the opponent's tough bones and foul flesh. Immediately after, before the Death Guard, who was letting out a low, sinister laugh from inside his decaying helmet, could launch any counterattack. Jose's other Dao steel arm, bearing the vibranium shield, suddenly swung out. The extremely sharp edge of the energy shield completely separated the opponent's entire head from his putrid body. Boom! A headless, rotten corpse, emitting a foul stench and slime, fell heavily to the ground, making a loud sound as it collided with the dirty floor. And Jose, without hesitation, abruptly rotated his helmet's eyepiece. He stared intently into the deeper part of the passage. A Blightlord Terminators, wearing a tall and imposing Terminator armor of the ironclad type, holding a blight launcher and a corrupted flail, slowly revealed its extremely threatening and terrifying figure. Void Brothers, prepare freezing grenades. Switch to plasma weapons. At this moment, Jose, as the captain of the combat squad, did not charge forward like most veterans of the Carcharodons. He quickly raised the vibranium shield on his Dao steel arm. While his entire tall body rapidly retreated backward, he also calmly issued commands in the communication channel. In fact, besides their theoretical combat power appearing higher than that of Carcharodon's veterans, these Carcharodon's new recruits had one crucial point. They placed greater emphasis on the coordinated use of battlefield tactics and their equipped gear, rather than being a group of berserk warriors driven solely by extreme faith. The characteristics of the new Carcharodons somewhat coincided with Guilliman's Primaris Astartes. This also made them look more like Star Marines of the Universe era in combat, rather than Astartes. Crackling, freezing grenades, tumbling back and forth in mid-air in the passage, were quickly thrown towards the Blightlord Terminators. The large amount of cold ice shards that suddenly burst outward, while unable to penetrate the heavily armored Terminator armor in one go, immediately froze the opponent's entire lower body. However, just as the Carcharodon's new recruits, who had casually dropped their storm bolters, raised several plasma weapons, intending to quickly focus fire on the Blightlord Terminators. Boom boom boom. From the heavy grenade launcher in the Blightlord Terminator's palm. It suddenly fired blight grenades, each carrying a large number of pathogens and deadly viruses. In a flash of lightning, another Carcharodon's new recruit, who had directly entered a frenzied state, suddenly leapt forward. He used his tall body and vibranium shield as a cover, forcefully blocking the trajectory of the blight grenades, but his entire being was heavily engulfed by the terrifying toxic gas and countless shattered shrapnel that burst forth from the blight grenades. Hiss hiss hiss. Almost at the same time, Jose and the others, who had no time to thank their Void brother for his sacrifice, immediately pulled the triggers of their plasma weapons. Azure, high-temperature plasma spheres burst forth from the muzzles. Then they rapidly struck the massive body of the Blightlord Terminators. At this moment, even a follower of Nurgle wearing ironclad Terminator armor was utterly unable to withstand the continuous bombardment of numerous scorching plasma blasts, and ultimately could only fall heavily amidst the rising clouds of melting mist, completely losing his life. Void brother, if you still have some consciousness, please immediately inject the liquefied panacea you carry. If you are about to lose consciousness or find that the panacea is ineffective, please try to give us some effective feedback, and we will provide treatment based on the situation on site. At this moment, Jose, who had quickly put away his plasma weapon and bent down to pick up his storm bolter, knelt on one knee in his power armor. He gazed at the Void brother who was also kneeling on the ground not far away, speaking to him in a clear and organized voice. The several Carcharodon's new recruits standing behind Jose did not immediately step forward. They maintained a more vigilant watch over their surroundings. Captain, please do not approach me for now. The Dow steel outer casing of the power armor is damaged, and the servo mechanisms in my right leg and left arm are showing signs of malfunction. I also feel a large amount of viral matter rapidly eroding my Superman organs. The liquefied panacea has been injected by the life support system, most of the viral matter is being rapidly expelled from my body, and all injuries are recovering. Wait, Captain, something's happening. Something is suddenly whispering very noisily in my ear. I can't confirm if it's a hallucination caused by the injury or. At this moment, the Void brother, whose condition was originally improving, suddenly let his Dow steel hand drop. He quickly drew out his plasma weapon from behind his power pack, and the cold muzzle was pressed hard against his metal helmet. I am an Astartes belonging to the Carcharodon's great company. I come from Asia on native Terra. From the moment I voluntarily joined the Astartes, I only wished to fight for my family and my Void brothers. You chaos demons can wantonly tamper with my basic cognition and thought processes, but you cannot completely extinguish my fiercely burning will to fight. Void brothers, I must go first. For the Emperor. The loud roar from the Void brother quickly echoed in Jose's ears and the others. The next second, this Void brother, who was undergoing personal corruption by a chaos gods, pulled the trigger of his plasma weapon without hesitation. PFF'd. As the metal helmet and his entire head were completely melted away by the terrifyingly powerful, scorching plasma. The Void brother's headless body slumped slightly. Yet his tall body still maintained the heroic posture of kneeling on one knee. May your soul return to the throne, great son of the Void. Everyone immediately check your weapons and ammunition, retrieve any uncorrupted plasma weapons, and let's continue forward to avenge our Void brother. At this moment, Jose, who had quickly hidden his deep sorrow, abruptly propelled his power armor to stand up. He once again drew out that ancient chainsword, its sharp teeth stained with putrid slime and Dow steel fragments, and without looking back, he roared in a deep voice to the other Void brothers beside him. For the Void Father. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic Audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.